Hey guys, tonight we're heading way back, far past the powdered wigs and plagues you think you know, and deep into the murky heart of medieval Europe, where something as innocent as a bath could get you judged, sick, excommunicated, or worse. This is a world where soap is suspicious, water is dangerous, and the mere idea of scrubbing your armpits could be a fast track to hell or social exile. Yep, we're going all in on one of the grossest and weirdest chapters in human history, why medieval people were absolutely terrified of bathing. Before we get too deep into the muck though, let's be real with each other. You probably won't survive this. Not if you're imagining lush candlelit spa nights or ancient aromatherapy bubbles. This story stinks, literally. It's full of disease, superstition, religious guilt, and a whole lot of unwashed flesh. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your city and the time right now. I always love seeing where in the world you guys are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a street that doesn't seem real. The air hits you first. It's thick, pungent, a brutal blend of animal droppings, rotting vegetables, and the unmistakable stench of bodies that haven't seen water in months. The cobblestones are slick with who knows what, and every corner seems to ooze some unidentified fluid. Welcome to a typical European town, somewhere between the 12th and 14th centuries. The time? Irrelevant. The smell? Eternal. You walk past bundles of straw meant to absorb the street's filth, and vendors trying to hawk week-old fish without flinching. Children run barefoot over mud and manure while dogs gnaw casually on what might have once been a goat. This place is alive, but it's not clean. And oddly, nobody seems to care. That's because cleanliness, to your medieval neighbours, is complicated. It isn't just about soap and water. It's moral, it's spiritual, it's even political. And unlike our modern obsession with hand sanitizer and 3-in-1 body wash, these people think scrubbing your skin too much might literally kill you, or worse, attract demons. And yet, not long ago things were different. If you turned back a few hundred years before this current funk fest, you'd find yourself in the heart of the Roman Empire. Romans loved their baths. Giant bathhouses dominated cityscapes, filled with hot pools, cold plunges, steam rooms, and a social scene that mixed politics, gossip, and grooming in one steamy package. Cleanliness to the Romans wasn't just practical, it was patriotic. But you're not in Rome. You're standing on the bones of it, in a time that's forgotten most of what came before. And here's where the fun begins. As Rome collapsed, and its luxuries crumbled, so too did the infrastructure needed to keep people bathed and healthy. Aqueducts broke, roads disappeared under weeds, and the idea of public bathing started to feel sketchy, sinful even. That little public bathhouse in the centre of town, it still exists, but now it doubles as a brothel, and everyone knows it. So if you're seen going in for a quick scrub, people won't assume you're there for cleanliness. They'll assume you're there for company, naked company, with medieval STDs. So yeah, you stop going. Even if you could bathe at home, it's not easy. Firewood is expensive, and heating a whole tub of water takes hours. Plus, many people genuinely believe that washing too often weakens the body. They think it opens your skin, literally makes it porous and vulnerable, and invites disease to slip inside. Like the actual act of scrubbing might be a gateway for illness. You wouldn't want to wash away your protective layer of dirt, would you? That grime is like medieval SPF 50, and yet some people do try. You see a monk rinsing his hands in a small bowl. Not for cleanliness though, it's symbolic, a kind of spiritual cleansing. Because while water may be dangerous, it also carries holy weight. Baptism, for example, uses water to cleanse the soul, but only once, maybe twice if things go horribly wrong. So there's the first big contradiction. Water can purify or corrupt, depending on the context. And since nobody quite agrees on which it does more often, most people err on the side of dry. Then there's the issue of class. You're standing in mud, but if you were rich, you might have your own wooden tub hauled out once a month, or once a year. You'd fill it with lukewarm water, throw in some rose petals to mask the stench, and maybe add a few herbs if you're feeling extra. But you'd share that water with your entire household, in the same tub, in the same order. Spoiler, you don't want to be last. And the poor? They make do. Maybe a quick rinse in a river if it's warm out. Maybe a sponge bath with snowmelt in winter. But often, it's nothing. Just a prayer and a hope that no one smells you before you smell them. Now, here's a quirky fact. Some medieval people believed strongly that onions could absorb disease from the air, so they'd hang onions around their necks instead of bathing, trusting the vegetable to do the work their bathtub wouldn't. And on the scholarly side, there's still debate about how often people actually bathed. Some records show occasional washing for special holidays. Others suggest the elite bathed more often than we think, but privately and with lots of fuss. The big question historians argue over is whether people avoided bathing because they were truly afraid of it, or just because it was a massive pain to pull off. The answer, probably both. But you're here now, boots squelching through street slop, nostrils full of whatever's wafting from that open window, and you're starting to get it. Maybe, just maybe, if every bath came with the risk of disease, judgment, or scandal, you'd think twice too. So you hold your breath, tighten your cloak, and press forward into a world where staying dirty might be the cleanest choice of all. You keep walking through that medieval town, the scent trailing behind you like a second skin. The buildings are timber-framed, leaning just a little too much for comfort, as if they're gossiping with each other. Behind wooden shutters you catch glimpses of lives being lived in various degrees of grime. And just when you start thinking this society never cared about bathing, you turn a corner, and there it is, a bathhouse. Its faded wooden sign creaks above the doorway, painted with a crude image of a steaming tub and a few suspiciously cheerful figures inside. You can smell the place before you step near it, sweet herbs trying desperately to cover the sour musk of sweat and something vaguely meaty. Inside, laughter spills into the street, high-pitched, flirtatious, not exactly clean. This is no health spa, it's a Roman legacy turned medieval scandal. See, back when the Roman Empire was still flexing its aqueducts, public baths were centres of life. People didn't just clean themselves, they networked, made business deals, and casually soaked in massive marble pools with strangers. There was a structure to it. The frigidarium cold, tepidarium warm, and caldarium hot, like a thermostat-controlled journey through temperature and social hierarchy. And yeah, the Romans were definitely a little too comfortable with the whole public nudity thing. But to them, bathing wasn't just about getting clean, it was about being civilized. Then Rome fell, and with it, most of the plumbing. The early medieval folks inherited a decaying system of bathhouses, scattered across cities now ruled by new powers, kings, bishops, and the growing influence of the church. At first, people tried to keep the tradition alive. In places like Paris and London, bathhouses popped up all over, and many were communal, unisex even, which was already asking for trouble. And of course, trouble answered. These places started to gain a reputation, fast. When you mix hot water, dim lighting, and a bunch of strangers in various stages of undress, things tend to get spicy. The bathhouse wasn't just a place to scrub, it became a social zone, a central playground, and often a not-so-secret brothel. By the 12th century, many bathhouses offered what they politely referred to as extra services, and if you walked out of one whistling and freshly rinsed, your neighbours might raise an eyebrow or a torch. The bathhouse owners didn't help their case. Some started branding their businesses with names like the Swan or the Rose, but locals quickly learned those were code for come get washed and propositioned. You didn't have to look far to find a priest or a poet denouncing these places as dens of sin, where the only thing getting clean was your conscience, and even that was questionable. Eventually, local authorities started cracking down. City laws were passed regulating bathhouse behaviour, curfews, rules about male-female mixing, and in some towns, outright bans. But the damage was done. Bathing wasn't just suspicious now, it was downright scandalous. The church leaned into it hard. Public nudity, lustful mingling, touching yourself in warm water, even just to clean, all deeply immoral, not to mention dangerous to the soul. But wait, it gets worse. You see, disease loves close quarters, and bathhouses, hot, damp and overcrowded, were perfect petri dishes. When outbreaks of leprosy, plague and syphilis swept through Europe, bathhouses got the blame, and in a world without germ theory, it made a certain kind of terrifying sense. If a bunch of people bathe in the same tub and suddenly start dying, obviously the water did it. Never mind the rats or the fleas or the sewage dumped in rivers upstream. And so, bathhouses, those proud Roman leftovers, became ghost traps, empty buildings, boarded up doors, places people whispered about but rarely entered. By the late medieval period, a bathhouse wasn't a place you went to get clean, it was where you went to catch death or disgrace. Of course, not everyone agreed on what was proper. Across Europe, attitudes about bathing varied wildly. In Islamic Spain, for example, the influence of Arab culture kept bathing alive and even elevated. Bathhouses there were elegant, beautifully tiled, and operated as both sacred and secular spaces. The same was true for parts of the Byzantine Empire, where Roman traditions held on a little longer. But in much of northern and western Europe, the water turned cold, figuratively and literally. Now here's your quirky fringe fact. Some bathhouses would actually serve meals in the tub. Picture it. You're neck deep in warm, murky water with a stranger's elbow gently bobbing nearby, while a servant hands you a tray of boiled meat and bread. Bon appétit. And on the scholarly side, historians still wrestle with the question, were bathhouses really brothels in disguise, or is that just how the church painted them? Some evidence suggests that while certain establishments leaned into their risky reputation, others genuinely tried to offer hygienic services. But in the court of public opinion, especially in medieval Europe, perception was everything. And once bathing became associated with sin, the average person didn't stand a chance. So here you are again, standing outside that bathhouse, watching someone emerge looking freshly scrubbed and slightly ashamed. They avoid eye contact, they walk briskly away, cloak pulled tight. And you wonder, was that a bath? Or something more? You move on, nose wrinkling slightly as the smell of herbs fades into the background stench of the street. The bathhouse door creaks shut behind you, and you're left with the realization that in this world, being clean isn't just rare, it's risky. You're still in that town, moving deeper into its tangled alleys, and by now you've noticed a pattern. The cleaner someone looks, the more suspiciously people glance at them. A little dirt on your face? Fine. Stains on your tunic? Expected. But emerge with a gleam to your skin or a suspicious scent of lavender, and suddenly you're raising questions. What were you doing? Where were you? Who touched you? Cleanliness here has consequences, and most of them aren't good. You duck under a laundry line drooping across the alley, dodging a dripping pair of woolen hose and a stained chemise. Just ahead, another public space draws your eye. Larger, more open, with low wooden benches and steaming tubs of water being poured into large barrels. But something feels off. There's no joy here, no laughter, just an eerie quiet and a faint scent of boiled herbs. You're looking at a bathhouse still in use, but this one isn't for luxury. It's for disease control. You get closer and realise what you're seeing. Patients being scrubbed down by people wearing thick gloves and long robes, almost like proto-doctors. The atmosphere is clinical but clumsy. No one knows quite what they're doing. They're trying to help, but they also believe that washing could either heal or kill. It all depends on which theory they're following. Enter miasma theory. In the medieval mind, disease wasn't caused by bacteria because bacteria hadn't been discovered yet. Instead, illness was blamed on bad air, or miasma, a mysterious poisonous vapour believed to waft from rotting matter, dirty water, open wounds, or, you guessed it, hot baths. They genuinely thought that pores opened wide in warm water, like tiny gateways, making the body vulnerable to these deadly vapours. So the very act of taking a warm bath was like swinging open the castle gates and inviting the enemy in. And here's the twisted logic. If the world is full of miasma, and bathing opens your pores, then logically, staying dirty was a form of protection. Your layer of grime? That's armour. A crusty little defence system keeping the death fog out. And people took this seriously. They'd plug their noses with herbs, wear masks filled with flowers or vinegar-soaked sponges, and smear themselves with oils and waxes, not to smell good, but to seal their pores shut. Some folks even went so far as to avoid heat entirely. No baths, no fireplaces, nothing that might loosen the body's defences. You watch as an older man is gently lowered into one of the barrels. His face is pale, beaded with sweat, and his expression is pure dread. The washer mutters a prayer as she pours warm water over his back. A second later, someone else lights a stick of incense and waves it under his nose, probably to counter the miasma. It's a ritual of contradictions. Cleanse the body, but don't open it. Heat the water, but not too much. Let him soak, but not so long the vapours sneak in. And yet, this bathhouse isn't all doom and gloom. Some people still believe in the healing power of water, especially if it's from a holy source. Across the continent, springs and wells are declared sacred, often tied to saints or miracles. Pilgrims travel for miles just to wash their wounds in supposedly blessed water, hoping it'll cure them without also inviting in the plague. In these places, bathing is allowed, even encouraged, but only because it's divine. Here's a quirky fringe fact. Some towns would only allow public bathing during certain moon phases. It was believed that the moon could affect the body's openness to illness, like the tides. So if you bathed under a full moon, you were asking for trouble. But a waxing crescent? Perfect time for a rinse. Meanwhile, scholars today argue over just how widely miasma theory influenced everyday behaviour. Some claim it was a medical doctrine limited to professionals and upper classes. Others believe it filtered down into the general population through sermons, rumours, and sheer panic. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Not everyone could explain why they avoided baths. They just knew it felt dangerous. You walk away from the bathing barrel as a patient is gently helped out and wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket. His skin looks pink, too pink. A bystander crosses themselves. Another shakes their head like he's already gone. In a few days, if he dies, no one will question it. They'll blame the water. You turn down another alley and spot a market square ahead. Here, it's business as usual. Bread, cheese, a goose squawking indignantly from a cart. You pass a few men gossiping near a barrel of apples, and one of them mutters something about a neighbour who bathes too often. The others laugh. One calls it suspicious. You don't know what's worse, being accused of sorcery or hygiene. But to be fair, bathing was seen by some as unnatural. Think about it. Water was unpredictable, mysterious, even mystical. It could cleanse or drown. It was the stuff of baptisms and floods, healing and destruction. And for most medieval people, water didn't come from a faucet. It came from rivers, wells, and rain barrels, often dirty, sometimes diseased. So to voluntarily soak yourself in it, risky, odd, possibly demonic. And so, as strange as it sounds, you begin to understand why people feared bathing, not because they were stupid or lazy, but because everything they'd been taught warned them against it. The water wasn't just cold and scarce. It was spiritually loaded, socially complicated, and biologically misunderstood. Still, you can't help but feel the itch under your collar, behind your knees, the gritty feeling of dried sweat and dust working its way into your every fold, and suddenly you crave a bath, a real one, scalding hot, with bubbles and steam and no fleas, but not here, not now. Because here, in the shadow of bathhouses turned brothels and doctors who fear steam, the one thing worse than being dirty might be getting clean. You wake to a new day in the same medieval village, and something's immediately off. The air feels heavier. The usual din of street merchants and clanking blacksmiths is quieter, muffled, as if the whole town is holding its breath. You peer out from under your itchy wool blanket and see neighbours whispering, fingers clutching crosses, eyes scanning the rooftops like they expect something to fall from the sky. Something's wrong. And then you hear the bell, a deep, slow toll, once, twice, a third time. Not a church bell for mass. This one's different. It rings for death. You shuffle out, rubbing sleep from your eyes and trying to ignore the persistent grime under your fingernails. A boy runs past, clutching a basket of wilted herbs and crying. You follow the sound of murmurs until you reach a familiar alley. And there it is, a pile of rags beside a shuttered window. Except that pile of rags is a man, hunched and trembling, with dark blotches blooming on his neck. No one's helping. No one's touching him. They all know what this is. The plague is not the first time, and it won't be the last. Epidemics roll through these streets like storms, unpredictable, fast, and absolutely merciless. And in the face of such horror, people do what they always do: panic, pray, and blame the water. Because when the Black Death arrives, hygiene isn't the hero of the story, it's the villain. You walk toward the edge of the square and catch sight of a poster nailed to a crooked wooden pole. It's crudely drawn, warning citizens to avoid public baths until further notice. Too dangerous, too risky, too many bodies sharing the same steamy water. The message is clear: bathing spreads death. and it kind of makes sense if you don't know what's really going on. You see, in times of plague, everything becomes suspect. Rats, suspicious, strangers, highly suspect. But hot water? That's practically a murder weapon. The prevailing belief is that a warm bath opens the pores, making the body more absorbent to miasma. And miasma, as you now know, is the invisible enemy. A warm body is a vulnerable body. A clean body is a target. So the logic becomes inverted. If you want to survive, stay dirty. Don't sweat. Don't soak. Don't even breathe deeply. Even the healers buy into it. Plague doctors, with their beaked masks stuffed full of herbs, recommend vinegar rubs and dry cloths over bathing. They claim that washing could redistribute harmful humours inside your body, speeding up death instead of preventing it. One popular remedy: rub yourself down with a freshly killed pigeon. Apparently the bird absorbs the disease. Of course, no one bothers to ask the pigeon. Here's your quirky fringe fact of the night. Some towns believed that bathing during a plague wasn't just dangerous, it was criminal. In Milan, entire households were sealed inside their homes if anyone was suspected of bathing and then falling ill. The assumption was that they'd exposed themselves to plague spirits, and the whole family had to be sacrificed for the good of the town. Doors nailed shut. No escape. It's a level of paranoia that seems unimaginable until you're standing in the middle of it. You turn and watch as a woman pours a bucket of water onto her steps, trying to clean away whatever filth was left behind by the sick man earlier. People scream. They actually scream. Not because she's rude, but because she's using water, in public. During plague season, it's enough to get her fined, maybe even jailed. Scholars still debate just how deeply the plague influenced the fear of bathing. Some argue that the church, already suspicious of public baths, used the epidemics as fuel to further suppress them. Others believe people genuinely feared water's role in disease spread, based on patterns they saw but couldn't explain. Either way, after each outbreak, bathhouses fell deeper into disuse, and personal hygiene practices slipped further into myth and mystery. You wander out to the town's edge, where the river glimmers under the fading sun. It looks peaceful, clean even. But no one's bathing in it. Not today, maybe not ever again. You crouch beside it, dip your fingers in, and feel the cool rush of fresh water. It feels good, comforting. But also, in the eyes of your medieval neighbours, dangerous. This river might look pure but upstream. It's probably full of waste, rotting animals, and the occasional unfortunate corpse. The irony is thick enough to taste. The very thing that could help stop the plague, basic hygiene, is now avoided like the plague itself. And that brings us to the weirdest part. Not everyone gets the memo. You see, in some corners of Europe, especially in isolated monasteries or elite circles with access to better water and more controlled environments, bathing never entirely vanishes. Certain nobles still enjoy their rosewater rinses, some monks take ritual cleansing seriously, and a few physicians quietly advocate for occasional washing, so long as it's cold, quick, and supervised. But for the average villager, no such luxury. You live in a world where every cough is a threat, every bath is a gamble, and staying filthy might just be your best defense. You itch constantly. Your clothes grow stiff with sweat. Your hair is greasy enough to start its own economy. And yet, you cling to your crusty layer of protection like it's a second soul. You head back into town, the streets now darker and quieter than usual. A cart rolls past, carrying another body toward the mass graves. A woman clutches her child close, covering his face with a scarf soaked in vinegar. Everyone is scared, everyone smells, and no one is bathing. Because in this medieval moment, staying dirty isn't lazy, it's survival. By now, the itch is constant. Your tunic clings to your back with the sticky insistence of old sweat, and you've honestly stopped trying to remember the last time you changed it. A stiff breeze would probably snap it in half. The grime under your nails has taken on a personality of its own, and there's a faint musky odour that follows you like a loyal dog, equal parts body, boots, and dread. But you're not alone. Everyone around you stinks too. It's not just tolerated, it's normal, expected, even comforting in a horrible way. And that's when you realise something wild. The medieval fear of bathing isn't just about death or sin or scandal. It's also science. Or, well, bad science. It's medical theory. mixed with a hefty dose of magical thinking passed off as professional advice. You wander toward a wooden stall at the edge of the marketplace. There's a man there with a collection of coloured vials, dried plants, and what looks like a very sad badger's foot hanging from a string. He's a physician, or as close as this century gets to one. His robes are heavy and stained, his beard long and patchy, and he smells exactly like you'd expect someone covered in mustard poultices to smell. He's preaching to a small group of townsfolk about humours. Ah yes, the 4 humours. Medieval medicine's greatest hits: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. According to this theory, your health depends on the balance of these 4 internal fluids. Got a fever? Too much blood. Better leach some out. Feeling moody? That's excess black bile, obviously. The whole system is based on vibes and guesswork, and somehow it governs everything from your diet to your personality to your hygiene habits. Bathing in this context becomes a chemical risk. Hot water? That'll excite your humours, especially blood, and send them racing to your skin. Cold water? That could trap your phlegm and give you the shivers. Either way, you're not supposed to mess with your humours too often, and you definitely shouldn't do it with steam and soap. So instead of bathing, the doctor recommends what he calls dry washing. That involves rubbing your skin with linen cloths, applying a thin layer of rose oil or animal fat, and sometimes dusting your armpits with ground herbs or chalk. There's even a medical theory floating around that dirt itself acts like a natural barrier, protecting your organs from external shocks. The crustier you are, the safer you are. That thin shell of grime, it's like nature's band-aid. Here's a fringe little nugget for you. Some medical texts from the 13th century suggested that if you must bathe, you should pre-game the experience by drinking a cup of wine, tightly wrapping your midsection in cloth, and immediately dousing yourself with vinegar after the soak to seal your pores. No one quite agrees on how this helps, but they swear it works. And here's where the open scholarly debate comes in. Some historians argue that these medieval fears about bathing were rooted more in convenience and poverty than genuine science. After all, heating enough water for a full bath was hard, fuel was expensive, and clean tubs were rare. But others point out that the medical literature of the time was obsessed with bathing rituals. Entire treatises were written about the correct way to bathe depending on your age, gender, horoscope, and even your emotional state. So were people afraid of bathing because it was dangerous, or because it was overcomplicated into madness? Hard to say. Back at the stall, the doctor finishes his lecture with a flourish, rubbing onion juice on his wrist and mumbling something about stagnant ether. He waves off a concerned-looking peasant asking if her cough might be cured with a steam bath. Only if you want your lungs to fall out, he warns. You move along, weaving through the stalls, nose wrinkling as you pass a cart selling what appear to be cheese wheels, but might also be hardened animal fat. A butcher sharpens his cleaver on a stone, and a passing nun sprinkles holy water on a beggar, who then wipes it off, probably terrified of whatever sacred diseases it might carry. As the sun climbs overhead, the street grows louder, but not brighter. You hear the sounds of a lute being strummed off key, a pig squealing in protest somewhere down the lane, and above it all, the unmistakable hiss of paranoia. People speak in low tones about who bathed last and how often. The wealthier folk, with their silks and scented oils, are viewed with suspicion. Cleanliness becomes a social risk. If you're too clean, you must be hiding something. You overhear a baker telling his assistant to avoid the fresh-faced scribe who just moved into town. He bathes, the man whispers, like it's a crime. You can smell the rosemary. The assistant nods gravely and spits. To your medieval peers, you start to understand smell equals health. A strong, musky, unwashed scent means you're real, grounded, and possibly protected by your own filth. A person who smells like roses or soap. Untrustworthy. Probably cursed. Maybe even French. You stop at a fountain, dry of course, and glance down at your reflection in the cloudy surface. You look dusty, a little wild-eyed. There's a smudge on your cheek that's probably permanent now. But weirdly, you feel safer than you did earlier. Your skin, though grimy, is intact. Your pores are sealed shut beneath a brave crust of medieval armour. And there's something oddly empowering about being disgusting on purpose. You sit on the edge of the fountain and watch as a child scoops up a handful of dirt and rubs it into her arms like lotion. Her mother nods approvingly, and for a moment, you start to believe it. Maybe dirt really is medicine. Maybe your skin wants to be a battlefield. Maybe the bath is the enemy. And just as you're thinking this, a rider comes tearing through the street splattered with mud, yelling something about disease in the next town over. The crowd groans. A few people cross themselves. Someone mutters that it's time to stop washing again just in case. Because in the medieval mind, every outbreak, every unexplained death, every strange illness is a reminder. The cleaner you are, the faster you fall. The sun slips lower in the sky, casting a warm orange light over the warped rooftops and crooked chimneys of the town. The breeze picks up, rustling old prayer flags tied to doorposts and fluttering through open windows that probably haven't been cleaned since they were installed. You're making your way toward the cathedral now, drawn by the low hum of a choir practice that seems to echo through the entire square. But you're not here for the music. You're here because the church, not doctors, not peasants, not nobles, has the most to say about your bathwater habits. The church is powerful in this world, not just spiritually but socially, politically, and yes, hygienically. You enter the tall stone building, the heavy oak doors groaning behind you, and the scent of incense hits like a wall. Thick, floral, slightly burned. It's supposed to mask the sin of the congregation, but it's also doing its best to mask the smell of a few dozen unwashed bodies pressed into pews. You slip into a shadowy corner and watch. No one here smells good. In fact, if someone did, they'd probably be hauled in for questioning. The faithful believe cleanliness should come from the soul, not the skin. Outer beauty, after all, is a distraction. Vanity. And bathing, in its many earthly forms, can easily drift into temptation. The sermons these days are laced with warnings. Beware the pleasures of the flesh, the priest warns, which sounds like a general anti-lust message but definitely includes soap. Too many clean men have fallen into sin. Too many pure women have become impure one bath at a time. The crowd nods solemnly, as though the road to hell is indeed paved with lavender-scented lather. The thing is, the church isn't entirely anti-bathing. Monasteries often had washing stations, and some monastic rules even required regular cleansing, especially before meals and prayer. But there's a catch. It had to be practical, not pleasurable. You were allowed to rinse your hands, maybe splash some water on your face, and in some places do a full body wash a few times a year, strictly for health or ritual purposes. Anything more? That was suspicious. Too much enjoyment in the act, and suddenly you were a sinner instead of a saint. There's a famous line repeated in many Christian writings of the time: cleanliness is next to godliness. But if you trace that idea back, it's actually more nuanced. Medieval theologians often saw the body as corrupt, something to be subdued, not pampered. Bathing too often suggested you cared too much about earthly things. It meant you were focused on the shell, not the soul. And of course there were those pesky bathhouses again. The church really couldn't let those go. Public bathing had become too tightly linked to fornication, gossip, and all manner of mortal sins. A woman seen entering a bathhouse alone might be accused of prostitution. A man who emerged too refreshed might be assumed to have paid for more than a rinse. That moral panic only deepened when bathhouses started installing private rooms, perfect for illicit rendezvous. Soon city records were filled with complaints from priests and town leaders. Bathing was no longer just a physical concern, it was a spiritual battlefield. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In the 13th century, a few religious orders actually classified excessive bathing as a form of gluttony. That's right, scrubbing your knees too often could put you in the same sin bucket as overeating. Imagine confessing that to your priest. "Forgive me, Father, I was shampooed twice." Some clergy took things even further. Flagagulants, those zealous folks who wandered from town to town whipping themselves to atone for the world's sins, often refused to bathe at all. They saw suffering and filth as holy, a way to imitate Christ's humility. The more lice, the better. The more sores and stench, the greater your sacrifice. To them, water was the devil's perfume. But here's where the scholarly debate gets spicy. Not all church leaders agreed. Some reformist monks wrote about the health benefits of occasional bathing. A few even tried to bring back elements of Roman-style hygiene, arguing that a clean body could serve a clean mind. But their voices were drowned out by the louder, stricter authorities, who saw filth as armour against temptation. Back in the cathedral, the priest finishes his sermon and offers a bucket of holy water for anyone brave enough to approach. A young woman steps forward, dips her fingers in, and makes the sign of the cross. But even that simple act has weight. Holy water is fine. It's been blessed after all. But imagine if she'd poured a bucket of regular water over her head. People might start whispering. They'd wonder what she's washing off and what she's planning to do next. You leave the church and walk through the cloister gardens, where herbs grow in neat rows beside cracked fountains. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, medieval deodorizers. The monks tend to them carefully, but mostly to dry them and stuff them into satchels, not to steep them in the bath. It's all about scent management, not sanitation. You pause beside a small basin where a novice is rinsing his hands. He notices your stare and blushes. "Only for Vespers," he says quietly, as if explaining to you, and maybe to himself, that this isn't real bathing, not the sinful kind. Outside the monastery walls, people gossip about the clergy's cleanliness. Some say priests bathe in secret. Others claim they stay filthy to remain pure. Either way, the church controls the message. And the message is clear: wash your soul, not your skin. You walk back into town, passing houses with crosses painted on their doors, symbols of protection from plague or pestilence, or perhaps reminders to stay away from unnecessary water. Because in this world, even a well-intentioned bath can spiral into suspicion. And so, you adjust your crusty tunic, scratch under your collar, and accept the truth of the era. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but only if you don't enjoy it. The next morning comes in slow, greasy light. Fog clings to the narrow alleyways like old linen, heavy and damp, as if the whole town spent the night sweating in its sleep. The air smells of sour milk and something meat-adjacent, probably from the tanner's shop 3 streets over. You stretch your aching limbs and try not to think about the sheen on your skin, or the fact that the layer of dirt you wear now is probably older than some of the chickens scratching around in the road. You're not alone. Everyone is itching, shifting in their boots, doing the medieval version of dry shampoo with a cloth and a silent prayer. But today, there's tension in the air. Everyone's talking about the same thing, in hushed, slightly horrified voices. Someone bathed yesterday, fully, naked, in hot water, and now they're dead. You hear it first from a fishmonger, who drops the news casually between scales and splinters. He drew a bath during the warmest part of the day, she says, shaking her head, and that very night, gone. Her tone is half warning, half "I told you so." The man didn't die from the water, not officially. But in the logic of this town, there's no separating the two, and with that the fear returns in full force, if it ever really left. You wander toward the neighbourhood where the man lived. It's not far. Most people stay within a few miles their entire lives. His house is quiet, shuttered tight, a straw cross tied to the door. That's the symbol now, a warning not to enter. No one will remove the body for days just in case, but what you hear from the neighbours is more interesting than the death itself. One says he was always too clean. Another claims he used lavender in his water like he was trying to seduce someone, or worse, summon something. This isn't just about dirt, it's about morality, about suspicion, about what happens when someone does something that feels too modern, too comfortable, too untrustworthy. And right now, that means bathing. But here's the twist. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. Because despite the fear, people still bathe. Sometimes, secretly, carefully, a few brave or reckless souls decide it's worth the risk. You pass an old woman fetching water from a well, and she tells you he opened his paws to the devil. It sounds dramatic, but she means it. There's a widespread belief that washing too thoroughly doesn't just invite disease, it invites evil. Demons, spirits, even witchcraft. A clean body is an exposed body, like a field stripped of its crops, empty and vulnerable, and during a plague that fear sharpens like a blade. People start washing less, not just because they're lazy or because they lack water, but because they're actively avoiding it. The more the disease spreads, the less inclined anyone is to risk a soak. When the Black Death first hits, back in the mid-14th century, it kills millions, an estimated 1/3 of Europe. No one knows what causes it, but everyone has theories, and bathing is always on the suspect list. Doctors and priests alike warn against disturbing the body's balance. Too much motion, too much heat, too much anything could summon the illness. And what is a bath if not everything too much? Heat, motion, scent, moisture, all rolled into one indulgent, plague-baiting package. So, people stop. Entire cities see their bathhouses shut down, even the ones still open or empty, haunted by the memory of cleaner, riskier times. In Florence, in Paris, in London, once centres of public hygiene, bathing becomes a taboo act, something whispered about rather than celebrated. Here's a quirky little detail for you. In some towns, plague doctors recommended a bizarre alternative to bathing called smoke cleansing. You'd sit in a closed room, burn sulphur or rosemary, and just marinate in the fumes, hoping it would harden your skin and drive out the disease. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work, but at least it didn't involve dangerous water. And here's the scholarly puzzle. Did people truly fear bathing because they thought it spread disease? Or was it because the church and local authorities used it as a scapegoat, an easy, visible action to blame for something no one understood? Some historians argue that public health orders banning bathing were more about social control than science. After all, it's easier to punish someone for drawing a bath than for catching invisible germs you don't know exist. You pass the shuttered bathhouse again. Its door has been nailed shut, a sign scrawled on the front warning of unclean spirits. You half expect to see a ghost float out from beneath the boards, trailing soap bubbles. But no, it's just a rat. Probably cleaner than most people here. As the day wears on, more rumours pop up. Another person sick, another who reportedly bathed the week before. People start pointing fingers, not at rats or corpses or filth, but at the clean. That scribe who always smells faintly of mint. He's probably cursed. The baker who splashes her face every morning before opening shop. Reckless. Maybe even a witch. Because now, in this twisted logic, the disease doesn't spread despite cleanliness. It spreads because of it. You find a bench and sit beneath a crooked awning, watching as two boys chase each other through the street, both of them covered in grime and laughing like lunatics. Their mother watches with tired pride. They haven't been near a bath in months, she says proudly. That's why they're still healthy. It's strange, isn't it? That in this world, filth equals safety. A scratch behind the ear, a crust of mud on your shin, even lice. All small signs that you're protected, that you've resisted temptation, that you're wise. As night falls again, and the torches are lit along the main road, you feel the fear thick in the air. People cough into their sleeves and mutter prayers under their breath. Doors are barred, markets close early, no one bathes. Not because they don't want to, not because they don't understand the stink, but because they know, or at least believe, that a single bath could be the beginning of the end. And so they scratch, they sweat, they wait. You wake stiff and itchy, curled beneath a makeshift wool blanket that smells like boiled turnips and feet, which, given the material and the century, is probably generous. Your back aches, your head itches, and your skin has developed that unmistakable medieval glaze, a greasy sheen of dried sweat, dust, and whatever the wind happened to carry your way in the last few days. And as you sit up, stretching your limbs beneath the early grey light of dawn, you realise something strange. No one around you seems to mind. In fact, most people wear their stink like a badge of honour, or at least like an inevitability they've chosen to embrace. But this morning, you're not in town. You're walking a dirt path into the countryside, headed toward a small manor that sits awkwardly on the edge of a forest. It's the estate of a minor noble, a knight who's gained a bit of land and not much else, and you've heard rumours that he bathes. Not once a year, not for weddings or holy days. No, he does it often, some say weekly. Others claim he does it to maintain his strength. This, of course, makes no sense to the villagers you've left behind. Bathing is a weakness, a vulnerability, a soft foreign indulgence meant for poets and plague victims. But for the nobility, things work a little differently. You arrive at the estate just as the sun lifts over the treetops. The manor house is modest by noble standards, more wood than stone, with a yard full of chickens and a few horses that look like they're more attitude than muscle. But the knight, Sir Bertram, is a curious man. A man who believes, according to local gossip, that bathing gives him power. Not spiritual purity, not moral superiority, actual physical strength. You're ushered through the gate by a sleepy-eyed servant and taken to the rear of the manor, where steam is curling from a large wooden barrel set over a fire pit. Sir Bertram stands beside it shirtless, muscles flexing as he pours another bucket of hot water in. He nods at you like this is all very normal, like he's not committing a social sin right there in front of God and chickens. "I bathe after every ride," he says, as if that explains everything. Keeps the sinew loose, keeps the humours balanced. And sure, his body looks well fed and functional, but to your medieval instincts he also looks exposed, vulnerable. A knight should be hard-edged, armoured, externally and internally. Yet here he is, steaming like a dumpling in his outdoor spa, confident that this ritual keeps him sharp. You watch as he lowers himself into the tub with a grunt, the water sloshing over the sides. He winces as the heat hits him, then sighs, an honest-to-goodness sigh of pleasure. That sound alone could earn you side-eyes in town. He tells you that other knights mock him. "They think it makes me soft," he says, running a wet cloth down his arm. "They don't understand. A clean body is like a sharpened blade." And there it is, the divide. While most of the population sees bathing as risky, suspicious, even sinful, there are always outliers. Nobles like Bertram who flirt with Roman ideas of bodily care, who can afford the wood to boil water, who have servants to clean the tub afterward and discreetly dispose of the evidence. For the rich, the rules are bendable, especially if you're eccentric, intimidating, or happen to own land and swords. Still, it's not a fully accepted practice. Bertram doesn't brag about it outside his walls. When he travels to court or attends a feast, he layers himself in scented oils and powder like the rest, pretending his cleanliness is a side effect of good breeding rather than regular rinsing. Because even among nobles, there's a line between fashionable hygiene and scandalous scrubbing. You sit nearby as he speaks, the warmth from the fire seeping into your cold toes, and for a moment you get it. This doesn't feel like decadence. It feels like survival, like maintenance. And it makes you wonder, how much of the fear around bathing is just fear of vulnerability, of stepping out of your metaphorical armour and letting the world touch you? Here's a strange little fringe fact. In some medieval combat manuals, it was believed that soaking your body in cold water after training could temper your skin, making it less prone to cuts. Some even suggested alternating hot and cold to mimic the hardening of steel. Bathing, in this context, wasn't weakness, it was alchemy. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some knights refused to bathe entirely, claiming it made their joints stiff or weakened their grip. One legendary fighter reportedly went 30 years without a full bath, claiming his natural oils protected him better than armour. He died of sepsis, naturally. Historians still argue over how many nobles actually bathed with any frequency. Some records show royal bath attendants and dedicated washrooms. Others suggest these were rare exceptions, more about public display than routine hygiene. What is certain, though, is that when nobles did bathe, it was treated as an event, a performance of wealth and power as much as practicality. Back in the yard, Bertram climbs out of the tub and dries himself with a linen cloth that probably cost more than most peasants make in a year. He looks refreshed, pink-cheeked, steaming slightly in the morning air. "You should try it," he says, tossing the towel to a waiting servant. "But not too often. Wouldn't want to draw attention." You nod, already feeling the weight of the outside world creeping back in. The town, the stairs, the quiet condemnation that comes from seeming too comfortable in your own skin. You leave the estate with a strange mix of envy and unease. Part of you wants what Bertram has, a tub, some heat, a chance to scrape off the crust without fear. But another part knows that out there, among the merchants and midwives and manure, being clean is still seen as something suspicious, pretentious, possibly lethal. And so, like most people in this world, you tuck the fantasy away. You layer your cloak tighter, let the sweat build up under your arms, and decide to live another day in the safety of stink. Because even among the elite, bathing is a secret best kept soaked in shadows. You're back in town now, and it's market day, which means the square is packed elbow to armpit with people who haven't bathed since their last near-death experience. The air is a thick soup of damp wool, animal grease, and a suspiciously fishy tang that's definitely not coming from the bread stall. A bard is trying to play a lute near the fountain, but he's losing the battle against the smell. You pass a trio of women loudly discussing the latest miracle cloth that's supposed to draw toxins out of the body just by being worn. Spoiler, it's just another layer of linen, but hey, if you slap a few rosemary leaves in the seams, it suddenly counts as hygiene. But look closer and you'll start to notice something strange. Despite the widespread fear of actual bathing, people are obsessed with appearing clean. And that's where medieval fashion steps in, not as protection against the elements, but as camouflage against your own filth. Take, for example, the noblewoman gliding through the crowd like she's floating. She's wearing 4 visible layers: an undergown, a surcoat, a decorative outer robe, and a hood so stiff with starch it could stand up and walk away on its own. You know for a fact she hasn't bathed in weeks, maybe months. But she smells faintly of crushed cloves and dried lavender, and not because she's using perfume. It's because her clothes are stuffed with herbs, sewn into little sachets that hang beneath her arms and inside her sleeves. It's an entire odour-masking strategy, and it's considered downright refined. This is what you're looking at. Fashion as filtration. The more layers you wear, the further your skin gets from the outside world and from other people's noses. Your outer robe takes the brunt of the sweat and street funk. Your underclothes soak up the worst of your body's rebellion. And when all else fails, you just swap out your top layer and hope nobody notices the rest. Laundry's a lot easier than a full-body scrub after all, but not everyone has that luxury. Peasants, tradesmen, apprentices, they make do with 1 or 2 outfits a year max. Instead of layering for fashion, they layer for survival. Wool tunics over linen shifts, maybe a belt with a pouch of herbs or a chunk of waxy animal fat to rub on the skin. Not because it smells good, because it seals in the funk, like putting a cork in a bottle that's already gone bad, and that's the real game here. Containment. Hygiene, as you'd understand it, doesn't really exist. It's all about control. If you can't stop the stink, at least you can redirect it. Maybe confuse it. Outwit it with a sprig of thyme under your hat and a leather pouch full of crushed mint in your pocket. Here's a wonderfully weird fringe fact. Some upper-class men wore little cone-shaped hats filled with dried flowers and powdered herbs, designed to slowly release scent throughout the day like a medieval Glade plug-in. These weren't fashion statements. They were defense mechanisms, a portable nose-blind bubble of olfactory self-care. Of course, there's still an open, scholarly debate on how much of this was deliberate hygiene theatre versus just plain superstition. Did people really believe their linen layers and herb pouches kept them clean? Or were they just trying to survive socially? Some historians say the fashion was dictated by church modesty standards, not hygiene at all. Others argue that the clothing was shaped by necessity. The more layers you wore, the fewer flea bites you suffered, and the less skin you had to wash. Either way, it's working, sort of. You stroll past a tailor's booth where bolts of cloth hang like colourful shields. The tailor is explaining to a customer how darker colours hide sweat stains better, and lighter colours can reflect heat, reducing the amount of stink build-up. He doesn't use the word stink, of course. He calls it body essence, like it's an artisanal cheese. The customer nods, convinced, and picks out a deep plum wool with a vinegar rinse. Back near the bread stall, a woman is dusting her child with a fine powder made from dried flowers and chalk. It's a poor man's deodorant, and it's doing exactly nothing. But it makes her feel better, makes her child look cared for. And in this world, perception is half the battle. You decide to test the system yourself. You stop by a merchant selling scented oils and buy a vial of something called basil blossom elixir, which smells suspiciously like goat and disappointment. Still, you dab a bit on your wrists, and immediately someone passing by comments that you smell like the apothecary's nephew. You're not sure if it's a compliment, but it's definitely a reaction. And that's the point, because in a society that fears bathing, smell becomes your currency, your calling card. Too clean, and you're a target. Too dirty, and you're shunned. But just the right blend of herbs, oils, and carefully curated linen stains, that's social camouflage. That's survival. You take a seat near the fountain, the same cracked stone basin that's been dry for years, and you watch the crowd with new eyes. Every outfit is a strategy. Every odour is a clue. Some people layer for warmth, some for modesty, some just to muffle their own human soup of odours. It's not cleanliness, it's fashion hygiene, a desperate, fragrant illusion designed to keep everyone convinced that no one's as filthy as they feel. And maybe that's the weirdest part. Deep down, you all know the truth. You're filthy. You're all slowly marinating in your own sweat and fear, but you've built a culture that lets you pretend otherwise, one rose-scented sleeve at a time. And so, you rise, adjust your cloak, and take one last whiff of your basil goat potion before vanishing back into the crowd. Another carefully scented phantom in a world too scared to scrub. You're walking through the outer lanes of town now, where the streets are narrower, the roofs sag just a little lower, and the smell of centuries-old sweat is replaced by something even more personal, body odour. Real, raw, unapologetic armpit funk. It hits you like a wall the moment you pass a group of field hands unloading sacks of grain. One of them raises his arm to scratch his shoulder, and instantly the surrounding flies break formation and flee. It's that potent. Here's the thing, deodorant isn't a concept in medieval Europe. Antiperspirant? Forget it. You've entered the era of the Armpit Wars, an unspoken olfactory arms race in which no one wins, but everyone participates. Everyone stinks, but they stink in different ways, and that's where things get interesting. You pass a group of young women tending to laundry by a stream. Well, laundry is generous. They're mostly scrubbing linen shifts against stones, laughing as they flick water at each other and pretend this isn't their 5th time trying to wash the same pair of undergarments in a river where pigs also bathe. One of them pulls a bundle of dried mint from her satchel and tucks it under her bodice. Another rubs crushed rosemary under her arms. You recognise the technique now. Homemade deodorant, medieval edition. They're not trying to eliminate the odour. They know that's impossible. What they're doing is layering it, turning their natural scent into something slightly less aggressive. It's like putting a flower on top of a compost heap and calling it a centrepiece. But hey, it's better than nothing. And this is where the cultural creativity shines through. You pass a merchant wearing a sash filled with scented wax beads, which he claims melts gently against the body for a full day's freshness. You highly doubt that, considering he smells like onions and wet wool. But there's no shortage of invention in this world. No end to the ways people try to deal with the fact that they all, universally, reek. You hear whispers about a noblewoman up the hill who uses vinegar-soaked cloths to dab under her arms each morning. Another swears by a secret potion made from burnt orange peels and lard, which is honestly more disturbing than helpful. And of course, there's always the classic, just don't lift your arms. One man you meet, a tanner with forearms the size of tree trunks, boasts that his smell keeps away both thieves and demons. No one comes close enough to rob me, he laughs, showing off a gap-toothed grin. Or tempt me. He may have a point. The air around him could peel paint off a fresco. Here's a weird little fringe fact for your nose to consider. Some medieval guides suggested sweating out bad humours to improve your natural scent. They believed that armpit odour wasn't a hygiene issue. It was a spiritual and medical signal, a warning flag that something inside you was unbalanced. The solution? Exercise, fasting, or walking in circles until you collapse. All excellent ways to make your body reek even more. And there's still debate among scholars about how far this olfactory paranoia went. Did people really not care about the smell? Or were they so used to it that their noses simply adjusted, the way you stop noticing your own dog's breath after a while? Some argue that medieval people were just nose-blind to themselves and each other. Others believe that they noticed, and hated it, but didn't have the resources or societal permission to do anything about it. Regardless, the stench lingers. You wander into a small apothecary, a cluttered wooden room with shelves lined in bottles, powders, and dubious jars of things floating in mystery juice. The herbalist, a wiry man with more stains on his apron than fabric, shows you his prized invention, a blend of crushed sage, alum, and beeswax meant to seal the pores and perfume the flesh. He dabs some under your arm with a grin. You immediately regret it. It smells like burnt hay and despair. But outside, someone notices. A woman sniffs the air as you pass and says, "You smell sharp." It's not a compliment. It's more of an assessment, a guess, possibly a warning to others. Because here's the kicker. In medieval Europe, your body odour is your brand. It says who you are. A peasant smells like dirt and labour, a monk like dust and incense, a noble like roses, cloves, or maybe just mouldy velvet. And if your smell doesn't match your station, people notice, people talk. There's even a hierarchy to the funk. Good body odour is earthy, honest, strong. Bad odour is sour, floral, or suspiciously clean. If you smell like something that doesn't belong on a farm, a battlefield, or a kitchen, people start asking questions. Are you sick? Are you hiding something? Are you French? And yes, national. Stink stereotypes are real. The English mock the French for bathing too much. The French mock the English for smelling like damp moss. Everyone mocks the Italians for wearing perfume and acting like that counts. It's all part of the strange, sweaty tapestry of medieval life. You can't win the armpit wars, but you can survive them, with a bit of vinegar, a sprig of thyme, and a heavy cloak to muffle the evidence. As the day fades into a golden, fly-speckled dusk, you retreat to a nearby stable to sleep. It smells like hay, manure, and horse, but honestly, it's less offensive than some of the people you passed today. You pull your cloak tight, tuck your nose beneath the collar, and tell yourself you'll figure out this whole hygiene thing eventually. Just maybe not tonight. Morning drips in through the rafters of the stable like cold molasses. A rooster announces the day far too enthusiastically, and the horses snort in agreement. You're awake now, groggy and tangled in your crusty wool cloak, the straw beneath you prickly and riddled with the sharp perfume of manure. You sit up, rub your face, and come face to face with the medieval truth you've been trying to ignore. You reek. Badly. Your breath could peel a fresco. Your scalp itches with the force of 1,000 invisible invaders, and your skin feels like it's wearing its own exoskeleton. And so, with great reluctance and a growing sense of dread, you decide it's time. You need to find soap. You've heard whispers around town of a woman who makes it. Old, strange, reclusive. They say she lives near the edge of the village, in a stone hut with a roof patched together from moss and divine intervention. They also say she might be a witch, because in this world, if you willingly deal with chemicals that burn your skin and produce bubbles, you're either brave or bewitched. You head down the dirt path, dodging a wheelbarrow of cabbage and 2 children sword-fighting with old sausages, until you reach the soapmaker's cottage. It's half buried under creeping ivy, and the smell hits you before the door opens, a pungent cocktail of ash, boiled fat, and something herbal that might be thyme or might be old socks, hard to tell. The woman who greets you is small, sharp-eyed, and covered in streaks of something greyish-green. "You here for soap or spells?" she asks, as if there's a real difference. When you say soap, she nods, mutters something about brave souls, and beckons you inside. The process, as it turns out, is medieval chemistry at its most chaotic. Soap making isn't a craft here. It's a dangerous experiment teetering on the edge of fire hazard and alchemy. You watch as she stirs a massive cauldron filled with animal fat, ashes and rainwater. The smell is vivid. You try not to gag. She explains that the key to soap is lye, which she makes by pouring water through wood ash collected from her hearth. The resulting liquid is so caustic it can dissolve your skin if you're not careful. And yet, when mixed with fat, usually beef tallow or pig lard, it becomes something vaguely cleansing, eventually. The mixture simmers for hours, thick and muddy, until it starts to solidify into greyish chunks. "You don't want to know what this batch is made from," she says with a grin. You believe her. There's a certain haunted look in her eyes that says, "I've rendered things I can't unrender. This is soap. It's ugly, it's rough, and it smells like death wearing a rosemary disguise. But it works. Kind of." She hands you a lumpy bar wrapped in linen and says, "Use it sparingly, and don't let the priest see." Because here's the deal. Soap isn't just rare, it's suspicious. Especially homemade soap, crafted by women, using materials most people don't understand. It borders on sorcery. A few towns over, someone was accused of witchcraft simply for selling soap that didn't smell terrible. And here's your quirky little fact. In some regions, soap makers were required to work outside town walls due to the stench of the process. The boiling fat, the chemical reactions, the sheer number of times something exploded. It was like running a medieval meth lab, with bubbles. You leave her hut with your hard-earned bar of soap and a deep appreciation for just how difficult it is to get clean in this world. It's not just the danger, it's the cost. The ingredients are hard to find. The process takes days, and most people simply can't afford to waste fat on something that doesn't go into a stew. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how common soap was in medieval Europe. Some records show soap being sold in towns as early as the 9th century, especially in southern regions influenced by Islamic hygiene practices. In places like Castile or Naples, soap making was a legitimate trade. But in northern Europe, soap was often homemade, inconsistent, and mostly reserved for laundry, not bodies. Washing clothes with soap? Fine. Washing yourself? Suspicious. So, Armed with your illicit brick of semi-cleansing doom, you return to town like someone smuggling a sacred relic. You hide the soap in a bundle of rags, glance over your shoulder like a thief, and slip behind a bakery to where a small wooden basin sits beside a rain barrel. You check the alley. No one. You unroll your sleeves, dip the soap in water, and begin. It doesn't lather so much as dissolve into a weird grey sludge. You rub it under your arms, on your hands, your neck. It stings. It smells. But slowly you start to feel not clean, exactly, just less crusty, less like a person who's been composting in his own sweat. Then comes the rinse, a cold splash from the rain barrel, a gasp, a flinch, and suddenly you feel alive, cold, raw, human. But then you hear footsteps. Someone's coming. You panic, dry off with your cloak, rewrap the soap, and bolt down the alley like you just robbed the bishop. Because in this world, being caught washing with soap is like being caught holding a secret, unspeakable luxury. It's not just scandalous, it's weird, and that's the irony. Soap is one of the few things that could actually improve public health, reduce disease, and make life marginally more tolerable. And yet it lives in the shadows, guarded by soot-covered women in moss-roofed huts, feared by clergy, mocked by commoners, and only really embraced by laundresses and eccentrics. You tuck your precious soap deep into your bag and vow to use it only when absolutely necessary. Like when your skin starts to fuse to your tunic, or when rats refuse to nest in your bedroll because you smell worse than they do. Until then, you walk the streets as one of them again. Filthy, pungent, and slightly safer because of it. You've managed to make it a few days without using the contraband soap again, though it sits in your satchel like a guilty conscience. Slightly greasy and softly aromatic, whispering that you don't have to live like this. But you do. Because in the medieval world, bathing might be suspicious, but skincare is somehow fine. Encouraged even. Just not in the way you'd think. You find yourself outside a local apothecary's stall in the marketplace, drawn in by a sign that reads, "Waters, ointments, unguents for the skin and soul." The woman behind the table is middle-aged, bright-eyed, and smells like lavender and toasted barley. Laid out in front of her are a dozen clay pots and bottles, each labelled in looping script: rosewater, camphor oil, honeyvine tincture, ground snail balm. You glance sideways at a man rubbing what appears to be mashed apple and ashes onto his forehead. He nods at you, completely serious. Keeps the demons from getting into my face. You don't question it. And this is the strange twist in the hygiene logic of the Middle Ages. While full-body cleansing is often viewed with suspicion or as an unnecessary luxury, selective skincare is acceptable, sometimes even essential. Facial washing, ointments for wounds or blemishes, and perfumed waters are all part of daily life for those who can afford them. A young woman next to you is buying a jar of crushed rose petals soaked in vinegar. "It softens the skin and frightens off suitors," she says with a smirk, applying it delicately under her chin. "Smell nice, but not too nice." You ask the apothecary what she recommends for someone whose skin currently feels like a medieval baking dish that's been overused and never washed. She looks you up and down, then hands you a pot of something that smells like beeswax and regret. "Made from rendered duck fat and ash," she says. "Good for burns, or for being born unfortunate." You thank her and take it, even though you're pretty sure this balm could also patch a roof. You find a quiet corner near the edge of the square and start applying the mixture. It spreads thick and sticky, but not entirely unpleasant. Within minutes, your skin starts to feel slightly less like a shedding tree. This, you realise, is how people survive without baths. They don't clean the skin, they manage it. They maintain it like a piece of aging leather, and it's not just about comfort. There's a deeper belief here, that the condition of your skin reflects the condition of your soul. Smooth, clear skin means inner purity, divine favour. Rashes, boils, that's God punishing you for something. No wonder people are always trying to soothe their blemishes with holy water or smear mashed basil on their warts while reciting psalms. Here's your quirky historical fact. Some medieval skin treatments involved mercury. Yes, actual mercury, the kind that melts your brain. Apothecaries believed it could cure skin disease, whiten the complexion, and drive out bad humours. Technically, they weren't wrong. It did drive out something, usually the user's sanity. You also learn that animal byproducts are skincare staples. Marrow-infused salves, ox bile lotions, even a face mask made from sheep's brains and elderberry. A travelling seller pitches you a miracle rub for for dry skin made from eel grease and burnt barley. You pass politely. Despite the raw ingredients, some of these concoctions actually work. Honey, for instance, is used to soothe wounds and soften skin. Oatmeal acts as a gentle exfoliant. Even certain clays were known to pull out impurities, though they also pull out whatever dignity you had left. There's ongoing debate among historians about how widespread these skincare practices were. Some say only the rich could afford such luxuries. Others point to records of peasant women making their own rose water or herbal salves from kitchen scraps and field weeds. The consensus? It was everywhere, but uneven. For every noblewoman with a perfume chest, there was a farmer's wife rubbing garlic on her cheeks, because someone's grandmother swore it would tighten the skin. You wander from the market into a small chapel garden, where a few nuns are tending to herbs. One is grinding marigold petals into a fine paste. She tells you it's for a young boy with a rash on his neck. Too much heat, too much sin, she says, not unkindly. Then she offers you a bowl of warm water infused with lavender and mint. For your hands. You hesitate. There's always the risk of being seen enjoying a wash, but the water smells good. It's warm. You dip your fingers in and sigh. This, you realise, is the loophole. Washing isn't entirely forbidden, it just has to be subtle, targeted, spiritual. You can't scrub your whole self in broad daylight, but you can cleanse your forehead with holy water. You can rinse your hands before prayer. You can dab rose oil behind your ears if it smells holy enough, so you do. You sit on a stone bench beneath an ivy-covered wall and give your skin some overdue attention. You use the balm, the water, even a little. Powdered chalk from your bag to touch up the worst of the grime. It's not a bath, but it's something, and people notice. A passing monk glances at your cleaner hands and gives a faint nod. A child stops to ask if you're a healer. For a brief moment you feel elevated, less like a walking sack of filth and more like someone with potential. But then, as always, comes the warning. One of the nuns quietly says, "Be careful." A clean face is good. A clean body, though, that makes people nervous. You nod. Message received. You leave the garden with your balm tucked safely in your cloak, your fingers lightly perfumed and just a little less cracked. The itch doesn't vanish entirely, but you feel better, less raw, less forgotten by the universe, and you know now how the game is played. You won't wash. Not fully, not often, but you'll manage the skin. You'll fake the glow. You'll trick your neighbours into thinking you're blessed and not just buttered in duck fat and dirt. Because in the medieval world, real cleanliness is too dangerous, but a well-moisturised lie, that might just be your best defence. The road to the castle winds upward, dusty and slick with moss in the shaded bends, and your thighs are starting to regret whatever decision led you to climb it on an empty stomach and a slightly suspicious duck fat skin treatment. But you keep going. Because today you're heading into the lair of those who are clean by default. Or at least they pretend to be. The royalty. Castles loom in our imaginations. Stone giants of grandeur and order. But in person, up close, they're louder, smellier, and far more chaotic than the poems would have you believe. Chickens strut through the gatehouse. Wet laundry dangles like flags from every wooden beam. Someone is screaming about goose theft. And above it all, the distant, high-pitched yowl of a noble child having a tantrum over cold apples. You're led inside by a page who smells like cinnamon and terror, through winding halls where the air is heavy with incense and something vaguely floral. That scent. It's the illusion. The mask. Because if you've come looking for polished royalty with lavender breath and silken skin, prepare to be disappointed. Even the highest born among the medieval elite had a unique relationship with bathing. You're brought to the Solar, the castle's main living space, where you find the queen. Not the queen, mind you. Just a local noble with a title long enough to make you lose interest halfway through. She's seated by a fire, wrapped in layers of velvet and fur despite the summer heat. Beside her sits a silver basin filled with warm, perfumed water, and a servant carefully dabbing at her wrists and forehead with a strip of linen. Clean enough for appearances, the servant mutters, not so clean as to offend the heavens. And there it is. The royal approach to hygiene is not about health, it's about presentation. You're expected to look clean, smell vaguely pleasant, and shimmer in candlelight, but only from the neck up, and preferably without ever exposing your full body to water. Bathing is a performance, not a practice. That little basin, It's the centerpiece of the noble cleansing ritual, the partial wash. Hands, face, neck, maybe the feet if things have gotten dramatic. Royalty doesn't dunk themselves into tubs like peasants trying to outsmart the plague. No, they dab. They pat. They allow themselves to be gently sponged by someone who's been trained not to stare. Soap is used sparingly, if at all. Mostly it's scented oils, ground flower petals and rosewater rinses. The idea is to maintain the image of divine grace, not physical purity. Too much scrubbing, too much nakedness. That starts to feel uncomfortably human. And the upper classes are very invested in seeming like they've transcended the human experience. Here's your historical oddity of the night. Some royal courts had entire positions dedicated to the bathing ritual. In France, for example, the valet de garde-robe would supervise the scented linens and the water's temperature, ensuring the noble skin never touched anything common. These people were essentially high-status spa attendants, with the job of making sure bathwater felt like royalty, even when the person in it didn't. But here's the joke. Most royals rarely actually bathed. Full-body bathing was expensive, risky, and, let's be honest, a logistical nightmare. Heating water took hours. The tub, often made of wood or lined with fabric, had to be assembled, and then someone had to carry buckets of hot water, one by one, up drafty stone stairs. So a royal bath happened maybe a few times a year max, maybe more if they were sick or newly married and trying to impress someone with the exotic concept of soap. And yet, they looked clean. They smelled clean. That's where perfume came in. Royals didn't skimp on scent. The noble class surrounded themselves with sachets of herbs, perfumes imported from the Middle East, and flower petals crushed into wax. They powdered their wigs, their cloaks, their gloves, anything to create a buffer between their bodies and the world's expectations. There's still scholarly debate about how much of this was just symbolic versus effective. Some argue that these scents and rituals were just elaborate smokescreens, while others point to letters and court records suggesting that some nobles genuinely believed rosewater and prayer were enough to protect them from disease. It wasn't just vanity, it was belief. You're offered a sample of the Queen's rose ointment, dabbed on a silk kerchief and held under your nose. It's strong, almost offensively sweet. But when you lean closer, you catch the sour undertone of unwashed skin beneath it. That's the truth behind the mask. Underneath all the expensive aromas and fine fabrics, royalty smells like the rest of us. Just with more florals. The Queen, ever gracious, asks if you'd like to see the bath. Not her bath, no one sees that. But the bathing room, a semi-permanent fixture tucked near the kitchens where water is plentiful and heat is easiest to trap. You follow the page down a corridor, past tapestry-covered walls and flickering torches, until you reach a stone room with a copper tub and tiled floor. It's beautiful, in a practical sort of way. The tub is large enough for one, and only one. The water, already drawn, is slightly cloudy. Flower petals float on the surface like decorative scum. You're told it's been used once this week, a rare indulgence. For the Duke's cousin's fever, the page says, they boiled rosemary in it to chase out the sickness. You nod and don't ask what happened to the cousin. You already suspect the answer. Still, the place holds a kind of reverence. This isn't a room for filth, it's a chamber for ritual, for symbolic purification, which means it'll be drained, scrubbed with vinegar, and left to dry in silence until the next noble gets permission from God, the stars, and at least 2 doctors to lower themselves into it. As you leave the castle, back down the mossy path, you can't help but laugh at the paradox. The peasants don't bathe because it's dangerous. The royals don't bathe because it's beneath them. And somewhere in between, you walk the tightrope of trying to stay clean enough to pass but dirty enough to survive. You tighten your cloak, smell the faintest trace of rose on your collar, and wonder how long it'll take before that duck-fat balm you used starts to go rancid. Probably tomorrow. The castle fades into the mist behind you as you descend back into the valley, boots squelching through a trail that's mostly mud and partly horse droppings. The smell of rosewater and privilege clings faintly to your cloak, but out here in the open air, the illusion doesn't stand a chance. The scent is already losing a slow, humiliating battle against the odour rising from your own feet, which, at this point, might qualify as a medieval delicacy if you left them near a fire long enough. You're heading to the edge of town, toward the peasant cottages, low, lopsided dwellings made of wattle, daub, and the sheer will to survive. Chickens roam freely here. Children wear the same shirts for months, and if someone gets fancy, they might own 2 pairs of shoes, which is both a luxury and a sanitation nightmare. You're here to learn how the lower classes get by. Not the nobility with their scented gloves or the monks with their holy puddles, but the people who have to work, sweat, and somehow not die before age 35. And what you find, to your surprise, is that even among the mud and misery, bathing, of a kind, still happens. You knock on the door of a small thatched hut and are welcomed in by a cheerful woman missing 2 teeth and most of her inhibitions. Her name is Maud, and she offers you a seat near the hearth, where a dented iron pot is simmering over a fire. At first you think it's stew, but no, it's bath water. She's heating it slowly, ladle by ladle, with the patience of a woman who knows that cleaning herself will be the biggest event of her week. Don't get too excited, she laughs. It's not like I'm washing everything, just the bits that might start a riot. You sit and watch as she prepares what she calls a bucket bath. The process is painfully slow. Heat water in batches, pour it into a wooden tub barely wider than a goat, add a handful of crushed mint and a bit of vinegar if there's any left. Soap if she's lucky. A worn cloth hangs nearby, hard enough to double as a weapon. She tells you it'll soften once it's wet. You're sceptical. When it's finally ready, she strips down to her shift and begins to wash. Face, hands, armpits, feet, just the essentials. She does it methodically, without embarrassment, and definitely without ceremony. This is not a spa treatment. This is damage control. And then, just as quickly, it's done. The water is reused, first for her youngest child, then for the older 2, then for the laundry if there's time. Nothing goes to waste. Not heat, not water, and definitely not the effort it took to get it all up to a barely tolerable temperature. You ask her how often she does this. Once a week if the weather holds, once a month if it doesn't, she shrugs. Summer's easier, you can dunk in the stream. Winter, you just wait until your neighbours complain. And here's where you learn a fascinating truth. The peasants bathe more than you'd expect. Not because they love it, but because they're exposed. Unlike the nobles with stone walls and perfumed servants, peasants live in filth they can't afford to ignore. When you sleep beside your animals, use a bucket for a toilet, and step outside into a street that doubles as a drainage ditch. Cleanliness stops being a luxury. It becomes a form of survival, not a full bath, of course. That's still rare. But washing hands and faces with rainwater, rinsing feet after field work, sponging down with rags, these are common practices. They have to be. Because when you're one infected blister away from losing a limb, you learn to wipe the mud off at least occasionally. Here's your quirky fact. In some medieval villages, there were communal tubs at crossroads or near the local alehouse, filled with lukewarm, slightly herbal water. These were used mostly for foot washing after a day in the fields. It wasn't just practical, it was social. People would sit, chat, soak their feet and share gossip, while pretending their toes weren't shrivelling in yesterday's cabbage water. Of course, there's a long-standing academic debate about how often peasants actually washed. Some scholars argue that rural people maintained better hygiene than city dwellers simply because they had more access to clean streams and less crowded living conditions. Others claim those same streams were used for laundry, livestock and the occasional emergency urination, making them less than ideal for personal use. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between reasonably clean and festering. You step outside again as Maud throws the bathwater into her garden with a grunt. Steam rises from the dirt. The kids are already rolling around in the same patch of mud. The cycle continues. Further down the road you pass another cottage where a young man is rubbing his scalp with sand and then brushing it out with a twig. Dry shampoo, medieval style. It works about as well as you'd expect. Still, his hair looks better than yours. A little further you come across a teenage girl brushing her teeth, or trying to, with a frayed stick dipped in charcoal powder. Her gums are bleeding slightly, but she smiles at you anyway. Keeps the rot away, she says, spitting a blackish glob into the weeds. You don't doubt it. All around you, people are adapting. Not bathing by modern standards, but doing enough to keep their skin intact and their neighbours at bay. They make do with what they have. Rainwater, ashes, animal fats, herbs, vinegar, and the occasional bar of soap passed down like an heirloom. You leave the peasant quarter that evening with a strange sense of admiration. These people are not clean, but they are resilient. They've carved out a kind of hygiene that lives in the cracks between poverty, superstition, and practicality. It's gritty, it's imperfect, and sometimes it smells like feet, but it works, just enough to get them through the next day. And honestly, that's more than most lords can say. The sun rises the next morning like it's personally offended by your breath. You roll over beneath a wool blanket that now smells like goat, cabbage, and betrayal, and before you've even opened your eyes, you feel it. That ominous fuzzy texture coating your tongue, the strange numbness in your gums, the not-so-subtle throb from the molar that's probably preparing for its final performance. It's time we talked about something truly harrowing, medieval dental hygiene. Now, before you get the idea that no one in the Middle Ages cared about their teeth, let's be fair. They did care, kind of. They just had a different idea of what taking care meant. And also, toothpaste wasn't really a thing. Toothbrushes, as you know them, definitely weren't. But the need to not choke on your own mouth rot, that was real. You stumble out of the small cottage you crashed in last night and head toward the village apothecary, who doubles as the town's tooth expert, which is generous, considering his primary qualifications appear to be owning a pair of pliers and not vomiting at the sight of pus. He greets you with a nod and a mouthful of brownish teeth that are somehow both solid and collapsing. "You're early," he rasps. "Good. Morning breath's a sign of a strong constitution." You don't correct him. Instead, you ask what people like you, peasants, travellers, or minor nobility with questionable hygiene practices, did to keep their teeth from falling out of their faces. He starts pulling jars off the shelves, crushed mint, salt, charcoal, dried sage, even powdered deer antler. He mixes them all together in a tiny bowl and tells you to dip a damp cloth or stick in the powder and rub it on your teeth. Gently, or not. Depends how much you like blood. You give it a shot. The moment the rough texture hits your enamel, your gums scream. It's like brushing with volcanic sand. Your teeth feel cleaner, technically, but also violated. Pain's part of the process, he says cheerfully, means it's working. You learn quickly that oral care in the Middle Ages was a mix of folk wisdom, religious hope, and sheer determination. People chewed on sticks soaked in aromatic oils. They rinsed their mouths with vinegar or wine. Some even scraped their tongues with bone shards, which is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. And brushing wasn't a daily activity. It was more like seasonal maintenance. What about cavities? Oh, they happened. And if you were rich enough, a barber surgeon would happily dig out the offending tooth with a set of iron tools that looked suspiciously like torture devices. No anesthesia, of course. You'd bite down on a leather strap, scream into a cloth, and try not to punch the guy removing your molar with a chisel. Fun times. And here's a bizarre little fringe fact. In some circles, people believed that worms lived inside your teeth and caused pain by wiggling around. No joke. Toothworms were a common diagnosis for centuries. Treatments included smoking them out with herbs or packing your mouth with hot garlic paste, until either the pain stopped or your dignity fled forever. Now, despite all this, some people in the Middle Ages actually had decent teeth. Modern archaeological studies show that medieval folks often had better dental health than people in later centuries, especially before sugar became widely available in Europe. Their diets were coarse, mostly bread, vegetables and meat, which meant more chewing and less plaque. No candy, no soda, no processed snacks. Just a lifetime of hard bread and the occasional surprise pebble. But that doesn't mean everyone walked around flashing pearly whites. Tooth discoloration was common. So was halitosis, bad breath that could peel the plaster off a cathedral wall. And once a tooth went bad, it usually stayed that way. There were no fillings, no braces, no root canals. Just the long, slow slide into dental ruin. You head to the local tavern and strike up a conversation with a man whose smile is more gap than tooth. He claims he brushes once a week with charcoal, rinses with cider, and prays to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. She helps, sometimes, he says, pointing to a little charm around his neck, but mostly I just don't chew on the left side. In the corner, a woman is picking her teeth with a chicken bone. You glance around and realise everyone here has a system, a method. Whether it's chewing parsley, rinsing with brine, or sucking on cloves to numb the pain, medieval people did make an effort. It just wasn't a very effective one. You pull out a twig and give it a tentative chew. It frays at the end and starts to resemble a very primitive toothbrush. You rub it across your front teeth, and while it feels ridiculous, there's something oddly satisfying about the sensation. Less scraping, more massaging. Your mouth still tastes like old stew, but at least now it's minty old stew. There's still academic debate over how widespread these practices really were. Some records suggest daily tooth care in wealthy households, especially among women who are expected to maintain sweet breath and fair appearance. But for most people, especially those working the fields or trading in the markets, dental maintenance was low priority. Survival came first, smiling came last. You leave the tavern and wander past the church where a priest is holding up a relic said to cure all afflictions of the mouth. A few people bow, then return to picking their teeth with straw. It's equal parts faith and floss. As night falls, and you settle into another scratchy bed in another drafty room, you press a finger to your gums and sigh. Still sore, still tender, but miraculously still attached. You reach for your charcoal powder and chew stick, rub your teeth with just enough enthusiasm to feel virtuous, and then tuck it all away for the next time your breath threatens to summon demons. Because in the medieval world, you don't brush your teeth to stay healthy. You brush your teeth to survive another day without losing your smile. It's mid-morning, and the church bells are ringing with unusual urgency. Short bursts, one after the other, like a nervous cough echoing across the rooftops. You step out onto the cobbled street and notice people looking round, not running exactly, but wary. Doors creak shut a little faster. Market stalls that usually bustle are only half open. Something's off. You catch the scent of something in the air. Burnt herbs, maybe sage or mugwort. It's coming from the town square where a small group has gathered around a notice nailed to the public post. You squeeze through the murmuring crowd until you can read it yourself. The message is hastily scrawled, official, and grim. Those found excessively washing, anointing, or purifying shall be subject to questioning. Heresy and unclean practices are under new scrutiny. Wait. What? That's right. You've officially stumbled into a town where cleanliness isn't just suspicious, it's criminal. This isn't some vague, whispered superstition. This is a full-on government-endorsed ban on bathing too much. Not because of public water rationing, not because the bathhouses are closed. No, because someone decided that scrubbing yourself was now dangerously non-conforming. Too clean? You're probably a heretic, or a foreigner, or both. The line between spiritual purity and physical grooming just got blurrier than a medieval manuscript soaked in broth. You eavesdrop on a pair of tailors talking just out of earshot of the local guards. He was just rinsing his hands, one mutters. They said he was hiding something, washing away his sins with soap instead of penance. The other nods like this is the most logical conclusion imaginable. You keep walking, now very aware of the way your cloak swings too neatly, how your face is a little too free of soot. You haven't even used your secret soap in days, but your fingernails are suspiciously clean thanks to a bit of leftover charcoal scrub and a rainy puddle. In this town, that might be enough to get you noticed. You pass a woman hurrying her children indoors. She sees you and stiffens, pulling them closer, as if your freshish face might transmit blasphemy through the air. That's how they start, she hisses to no one in particular. With mint water and rose oil, next thing you know they're reading Latin and speaking to crows. You duck into a bakery to escape the stares and the rising paranoia. The baker, a large man with a face like a collapsed dough ball, eyes you cautiously. You one of them washed folk? He asks, half joking. You smile awkwardly and assure him that you're as filthy as everyone else. He grunts, seemingly satisfied, and offers you a slightly charred roll on the house. Solidarity through crumbs. And yet, the deeper you go, the weirder it gets. You hear whispers about secret baths held after sundown. People dipping into streams miles from town, wrapping themselves in reeds and cloaks to avoid being seen. One man claims to know someone who was arrested for boiling water in a tub with lavender. Tried to say it was for his joints, he scoffs. Joints, my backside. Man smelled like a spring morning. Here's your fringe fact for the night. In some regions, cleanliness was associated with religious sects viewed as suspicious or radical. Certain groups, often persecuted, practiced ritual bathing, believing in purification through water. To outsiders, this was alarming, dangerous even. It wasn't just about being clean, it was about being different. And in a time when sameness equals safety, difference gets you in trouble. So laws like these weren't just about hygiene, they were about control. Scholars still debate the extent of such policies. Some insist towns only discouraged excessive bathing out of disease paranoia or water scarcity. Others point to town records, church edicts, and even legal proceedings targeting overly clean individuals as examples of deeper systemic fear. Cleanliness became code for rebellion, individuality, secrets. You make your way to the edge of town, where a woman named Lisette is rumoured to run a hidden washhouse. She lives in a crumbling stone structure behind an abandoned mill, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. You find her stirring a pot over a low fire, filling the air with a pungent but oddly calming mix of thyme and pine. Lisette greets you with a look that says she's seen too much, and washed too little, at least in public. "You need a place to rinse?" she asks. "Not a full bath, just enough to feel human again." You nod. She leads you behind a wooden screen to a half-barrel filled with warm water and herbal oils. Not soap, too risky. But this is close. It's quiet, humble, safe. She hands you a rough cloth and turns away, giving you privacy that feels almost sacred. You wash your hands, your face, the back of your neck. You breathe in the scent and exhale something ancient, something crusted and heavy that's been clinging to your skin for days. You're not clean, not fully, but you're better, calmer, and more aware than ever that this moment, this tiny act of personal care, is illegal here. Lisette warns you not to tell anyone. "They think water holds secrets," she mutters, "like it washes away loyalty, washes in rebellion. They don't understand, they're afraid of what being clean means." And she's not wrong, because in this place dirt is loyalty, grime is faith, and anyone who dares to be clean might also dare to ask questions, to think, to refuse, and that's what really terrifies them. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the rooftops, you step back into the street, hair damp, collar still cooling from the rinse. You don't walk too fast. You don't stand too straight. You blend. Because in a town where being clean makes you a target, survival means playing dirty. By now, the medieval landscape around you has taken on a familiar staleness. Part animal, part human, all deeply fermented. The scent has sunk into your very bones. You've stopped flinching at sour breath, stopped dodging greasy elbows, and started accepting that the smell of boiled cabbage and toe rot is just background noise. But now something new is gnawing at your mind. You keep hearing whispers, strange ones, from different corners of town. Whispers that being too clean isn't just suspicious, it's unhealthy, dangerous, possibly even fatal. You pass a baker dusting flour from his sleeves, who mutters to no one in particular, "Scrubbed his skin so hard the sickness walked right in." You think it's just nonsense until the tanner down the road says the same thing, only this time about his cousin, who tried washing his legs in a stream and ended up with fever water in his blood. The local midwife says something eerily similar. Bathing too often weakens the body, opens the blood to bad spirits, makes you soft. Software. That word keeps coming back. Like vulnerability is the worst thing you could wear, you make your way to the apothecary again, the one with the herbal jars and the perpetually moist ceiling, to see if he can shed light on this dirt equals health philosophy. He's hunched over a mortar, grinding what looks like burnt bark and dried lizard tails into something he insists is medicinal. When you ask about bathing, he grimaces. Too much water robs the body of heat, he says, as though this is universally understood. The warmth of the blood must be preserved. If you soak too long, the heat escapes, and disease creeps in, especially through the feet. That's why old men die in clean socks. You try not to laugh. He's serious. The thinking goes something like this. The body is healthiest when its inner heat is in balance. Medieval physicians, working with a mix of Galenic theory and good old-fashioned guesswork, believed that excessive washing stripped the body of its protective warmth. It wasn't about soap, it was about temperature. And pores, always the pores. Pores in the medieval imagination weren't just little openings, they were highways. And when you bathe, those highways open wide, allowing unseen dangers, miasmas, bad humours, corrupted air to barge in uninvited. The solution? Stay sealed. Stay warm. Stay a little bit dirty. And here's your fringe fact. Some physicians actually prescribed dirt as a protective layer. Not metaphorically, literally. Seal the skin with ash, one old medical text advised. It will keep the chill from drawing out the life. Ash, as in fireplace leavings. Mixed with oil or animal fat, it became a kind of DIY body armour, medieval SPF. This belief that hygiene could weaken you, ran deep. Knights returning from battle were often told to avoid bathing for weeks, to keep from shocking the muscles. Pregnant women were warned never to bathe late in the day, lest their wombs catch cold. Even monks known for their stoic routines were sometimes forbidden to bathe more than twice a year for fear it would weaken the spirit. So naturally, when someone got sick, really sick, the last thing anyone suggested was a bath. And yet, here's the open scholarly debate. Were people genuinely afraid of bathing for medical reasons, or was this just an excuse to avoid a process that was expensive, inconvenient, and physically taxing? After all, heating a full tub took hours, clean water was hard to come by, and you needed someone to scrub your back unless you had freakishly long arms or a very trusting goat. Historians are split. Some believe the fear was rooted in actual experience, like people noticing they often got ill after big bath events, especially during outbreaks. Others argue that the medical theories were retroactive, justifications invented by doctors to explain why everyone around them looked like they'd just rolled through a chimney. You leave the apothecary and wander toward the river, where a few children are playing on the bank kicking up mud and laughing. One slips into the water and his older sister immediately yanks him out. "Idiot!" she hisses. "You'll catch death!" The boy just grins, covered in silt, looking more alive than anyone you've seen in days. But it sticks with you, that tension between the need to clean and the fear of doing it wrong. It's like everyone's walking a tightrope. Wash too little and you rot. Wash too much and you collapse. People try to thread the needle by rinsing individual body parts, or washing only during certain seasons. Some towns even kept communal schedules for stream access, lest someone overindulge and come back cursed. You meet an old shepherd who claims he hasn't bathed since the coronation of the last king. "Strong like ox," he grunts, flexing an arm that's mostly sinew and hair. "Water softens you, makes your bones lazy." When you ask what he does when he does feel dirty, he shrugs and points to a patch of grass. "Roll, like dog." Honestly, it checks out. There's a deep cultural pride here in being sturdy. Cleanliness somehow has been twisted into weakness. It means you're not busy enough, not hard-working enough, not tough enough to handle the elements. Real strength comes with calluses, with scars, with a layer of grime that says you've been too busy surviving to worry about appearances. As night falls, and the town settles into its usual stew of smoke and sweat, you sit outside your lodging watching fireflies skim over the manure pile, and you realise something kind of sad. People aren't just afraid of bathing. They're afraid of what bathing represents. Vulnerability, vanity, the temptation to comfort yourself in a world where comfort is rare and often punished. You pull your cloak tighter and scratch your shoulder, the itch now so routine it's become a bedtime ritual. You consider one last rinse from your hidden flask of water, but stop yourself. Not tonight. It's too cold, too risky, too revealing. Instead, you lean into the filth, like everyone else, and tell yourself you're stronger for it, healthier even, because in this world cleanliness isn't next to godliness, it's next to the sickbed. The morning begins with the rhythmic slosh of water and the unmistakable clang of tin pails. But this isn't some cheerful bath day in the village, it's laundry day at the convent. You're here because word on the road says the nuns know more about hygiene, real, secret hygiene, than they're willing to admit. And you're especially curious about how they deal with the medieval nightmare no one ever talks about in public, menstruation. You pass through the convent gates as Sister Agnes, a no-nonsense woman with arms like firewood bundles, directs two novices hauling linens from the infirmary. The air smells faintly of lavender and vinegar, and there's a row of drying cloths strung up across the courtyard. White and pale pink, stiff with repeated use and heavy washing. One of them, folded neatly, on a stone bench, is smaller, quilted, and clearly not meant for washing dishes. Sister Agnes catches you staring and raises an eyebrow. "Yes," she says, "that's one of them." You nod. No point pretending you don't know what they are. Menstrual hygiene in the Middle Ages was one of those subjects soaked in secrecy, shame, and a frankly heroic amount of improvisation. The church, unsurprisingly, didn't love talking about it. Public discussions of women's matters were limited to sermons about Eve, sin, and why childbirth pain is totally deserved. Meanwhile, the reality of monthly bleeding marched on, completely indifferent to male theology. So how did medieval women manage? With whatever they could get their hands on. Rags were the most common method, often linen scraps that could be folded, pinned or tied into makeshift pads. Wealthier women might have more finely woven cloths, even padded belts to hold them in place. But for most, it was a brutal balancing act between modesty and practicality. Sister Agnes explains that the convent keeps a supply of these rags, sanitized in boiling water and vinegar, reused until they fall apart. She shows you how they're sewn together in layers, the top sometimes dusted with powdered herbs to cool the blood. You ask what that means. It makes it smell less like death, she says flatly. And the smell. That's where things get interesting. Menstruation was considered unclean, not just in the physical sense but spiritually. Many believed menstrual blood carried corruption, disease, and even the power to wilt crops or sour milk. Midwives were taught to handle bleeding women carefully, as if one drop of blood might summon the devil or at least kill your cheese. You get a lesson in what some women did to avoid drawing attention during their periods. One method? Staying inside. Just flat out disappearing for a few days. Others burned sage or rosemary beneath their skirts to mask the smell. Awkward, yes, but arguably safer than being accused of harbouring demons in your womb. Here's a disturbing little fringe fact. Some medical texts from the time claimed that menstruation was your body's way of purging excess blood and heat, a kind of monthly detox. But if you bled too little, or not at all, you were considered dangerously imbalanced. Treatment? Leeches. Of course, because what could possibly go wrong with more bleeding? You watch a novice scrub one of the rags by hand, using lye soap so strong it leaves her fingers red and raw. There's no bleach, no disinfectant, just water, vinegar and sunlight. It's not about comfort. It's about not drawing suspicion. These women are already considered suspicious by many townsfolk. Clean, educated, organised, secretive. And now you know they also manage their bleeding with more grace and efficiency than most of the men in town manage their beards. Still, it's not easy. Sister Agnes admits that for some girls their first period is terrifying. They think they're dying, she says. We teach them it's a burden, but not a curse. That's a big step forward, considering some clergy insisted menstruating women shouldn't take communion or even enter the church. Impure, polluted, as if a little blood could drown the sacred. There's debate among scholars about how widespread these restrictions were. Some church records show priests enforcing harsh rules, barring menstruating women from religious spaces. Others suggest these were regional or exaggerated over time. But what's clear is that menstrual hygiene was rarely talked about and even more rarely accommodated. It was a personal problem, one you were expected to solve quietly, which is why places like this convent mattered. Here, at least, there's order, routine, a stash of cloths, a pot of herbal rinse, a system. It's not luxurious, but it's better than nothing, and it reminds you that even in a world obsessed with fear and filth, there are pockets of dignity. Women supporting women through something no priest would dare address. You ask if they ever teach the local girls what to do. Sister Agnes hesitates. We try. Some listen. Some say it's witchcraft. She shrugs. Better a witch than a mess. Out in the village you'd heard rumours of women bleeding in secret, stuffing their underclothes with moss or wool or whatever they could find, of some giving birth in silence, never mentioning their pregnancy until the child cried. It's not just shame, it's survival. Because in a world where blood makes people afraid, the safest thing a woman can do is bleed when no one can see. You help carry a bucket of rinse water out to the garden, where it's poured around the base of rosemary bushes. The scent rises up in soft waves, clean, sharp, oddly comforting. Sister Agnes looks at the garden, then at you. It's not a sin to take care of yourself, she says, as if daring someone, anyone, to challenge her. And that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? Taking care of yourself in this world, whether it's washing your hands, scrubbing your teeth, or managing your bleeding, isn't just hygiene, it's defiance. Quiet, steady rebellion against a system that calls you dirty the moment you try to be clean. As the sun dips lower, you leave the convent with a new respect for these women. Their grit, their stubbornness, their refusal to let the world's fear define them. You feel the soap in your pack, the balm in your pocket, and now you understand just how much effort it takes to survive in secret. To bleed without punishment, to wash without shame, the stench hits before you turn the corner. It's not subtle. It's not something that creeps in or gently offends your nostrils. No, it body slams you like a cart full of spoiled turnips and entrails, and then lingers like an overly affectionate goat. You gag, you blink, and you realise you've found the latrine zone. Welcome to the part of town where the human side of hygiene really shows its colours, brown mostly. You're in the public defecation district, unofficially marked by narrow alleys, overflowing trenches, and a stunning disregard for personal space. There are no bathrooms here, no outhouses unless you're rich or shockingly forward-thinking. What people have are buckets, chamber pots, and gravity. You pause beside a stone wall, careful not to lean on anything. A man nearby tips a full chamber pot out his upper floor window, and the contents hit the street below with a wet slap that echoes like thunder. He doesn't apologise. No one even flinches. A passing woman lifts her skirt just in time and keeps walking. Business as usual. You glance at the ground and notice the flow, a slow, syrupy river of human waste making its way down the centre of the street. The town's main drainage system. It's called the kennel, a shallow gutter built specifically for this purpose. People dump their chamber pots into it every morning, and rain is supposed to flush it away. That's the plan. The plan never works. You edge along the cleaner side of the road, stepping over hay that's been strategically scattered to soak up the worst of it. That's your medieval sidewalk. Straw, old cloth, or just sheer hope. You ask a nearby vendor how they handle all this, and she shrugs. You get used to the smell. You worry when you don't smell it. That's not comforting. The connection between waste and disease is still not understood here. Not fully. People think bad smells can carry illness. Miasma theory again. But they don't link that to the literal piles of human excrement sitting outside their doorsteps. So while they fear foul air, they don't stop creating it. It's a paradox of epic, smelly proportions. And this brings us to bathing, or rather not bathing, in this environment. Why, you might ask, don't people just clean themselves more when they're literally walking through filth? Because when everyone is covered in a layer of city stink, washing makes you stand out. It marks you as different, as impractical, and let's be honest, it barely helps. What's the point of scrubbing your skin raw just to step into a poop puddle 2 minutes later? You pass a man rinsing his boots in a barrel of greyish water. He nods at you solemnly. Don't wash the legs, he advises. They'll only get worse. Here's your fringe historical fact. In some towns, there were actually fines for dumping chamber pots out of upper windows without warning. That's right. Technically, you were supposed to yell something like "Gardez l'eau." Look out for the water before unloading your portable toilet onto the street. But let's be real. No one's waiting for a courtesy call while holding a steaming bucket of human misery. So you got dumped on. A lot. You weave through another alley and find a cluster of public latrines. These are about as elegant as you'd expect. Basically planks of wood over a trench. The smell is nuclear. You gag again and spot a child using a corner wall instead, like that's somehow cleaner. His mother doesn't scold him. She just hands him a scrap of cloth and wipes his nose with the other end. You ask a local about public sanitation. He tells you that some towns have waste collectors, nicknamed gong farmers, whose job it is to shovel out the cesspits and transport the contents outside city walls. But it's a once-in-a-while job, and when they do it, the stink is legendary. One writer described the smell of a cleaned latrine pit as capable of felling a cow. That's the official solution. The unofficial one is just to live with it. People hang sweet-smelling herbs in their windows. They sprinkle rushes on the floors of their homes to mask the odour of their own chamber pots. They cover their faces with cloth in crowded markets, not to protect themselves from germs, but to keep from vomiting on their neighbour. And then there's the bathing paradox. You'd think that in a place this filthy, people would be desperate to wash. But no. Here's the twisted reality. When the world around you is literally soaked in human waste, bathing doesn't feel cleansing. It feels futile. You wash, you step outside, and 5 seconds later, your feet are marinating in someone else's night bucket. So people stop trying. There's ongoing scholarly debate about whether medieval sanitation was as awful as it seems. Some historians argue that towns made a real effort, maintaining public latrines, employing waste workers, even regulating where pigs could wander. Others point to archaeological layers of filth and rats and say, let's not sugarcoat it. What we know for sure is that standards varied wildly. A rich city might have better drainage and some semblance of control. A poor town. You were wading through it daily. You reach the town's edge and find a stream where a few women are doing laundry. Upstream, someone's filling buckets for soup. Downstream, someone else is rinsing out a chamber pot. No one seems to think this is a problem. You try not to scream. As the sun dips lower and the shadows stretch across the street, the city's daily tide of filth recedes, slightly. But the smell stays. It always stays. It seeps into the walls, into the straw, into the cloth you wrap around your face to sleep. And you wonder again, how could anyone want to bathe here? What's the point? You can't fight a flood with a teaspoon. You crawl into your bedroll that night, just far enough from the kennel to avoid the runoff, and clutch your soap like a relic. You won't use it. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. Not until you're sure the road ahead doesn't lead straight into another river of waste. Because right now, in this place, staying clean feels less like a choice, and more like a very bad idea. There's something eerie about silence in a medieval town. Normally the air is clogged with noise. Squawking chickens, hammering smiths, crying babies, shouting vendors. But this morning it's different. Quieter. The kind of quiet that means someone important has died, or a storm is coming, or worse. People are suspicious of each other. And in this case, it's the third. Something spreading through the town. Not a disease, not a fire, but a rumour. Someone has been seen bathing. Again. You hear it while walking past the cooper's shop, where a pair of apprentices are whispering over a barrel half full of wood shavings. She came back from the river with her hair still wet, one says, as if that alone justifies a trial. Said she was just rinsing laundry, but who brings rosemary and lemon peels to do laundry? You keep walking. Over the next few hours it only gets worse. Whispers become glances. Glances become questions. By noon there's a crowd forming at the market's edge, murmuring about a young woman named Ellen, midwife's daughter, barely 20, known for being a little too clean. Someone claims she smells like basil. Someone else insists they saw her washing her feet in the well basin. It's all hearsay, of course, but in this world, hearsay is kindling, and bathing is the match, and you can see what's happening. The fear isn't just about hygiene, it's about what it implies. In a town where no one bathes, where every layer of dirt is worn like a badge of honour or a prayer for survival, a clean person becomes a threat. They're trying to stand out, rise above, reject the order of things, and that smells a lot like rebellion. You edge closer to the crowd, careful not to attract attention, and hear the conversation shift from gossip to something sharper. She don't sweat like the rest of us. Keeps her hands too neat. Always got those herbs hanging round her neck. Then, the inevitable line. Maybe she's not from here. There it is, the tipping point. Cleanliness isn't just different, it's foreign. And foreign means danger. This is the twisted logic of the time. To be dirty is to belong. To stink like smoke and filth and unwashed skin is to be safe. But if you're clean, you must be hiding something. A different faith, a different loyalty, maybe even witchcraft. You manage to catch up with Ellen in a narrow alley behind the church. She's quiet, cautious, cheeks flushed but not from shame, from heat. You notice the scent right away. Subtle, yes, but unmistakably clean. Soap and something herbal. She sees you noticing and lifts her chin. I don't care, she says. They can mutter. They'll still come to me when their babies won't breathe. She's right, of course. Ellen is the one they call for births, for fevers, for mysterious aches that priests can't exorcise. But midwives have always lived on the edge, respected but feared, trusted but accused. And now her hygiene makes her even more suspect. She tells you she washes when she can. Arms, face, under her shift. I touch new life. I won't bring death with my hands, she says. They don't see the difference between filth and strength. I do. You want to believe that's enough, that her usefulness will protect her. But as the day stretches on, so does the tension. You hear the local scribe mutter something about unclean practices and foreign customs. A merchant says he saw her boil water at dawn, which he claims is something the Moors do, and that's apparently all anyone needs to hear. Here's your fringe fact for the day. In some medieval communities, bathing habits were used as ethnic and religious markers. Jews and Muslims, for example, often maintained stricter cleanliness rituals, especially around prayer. Christians, by contrast, began to associate extreme cleanliness with foreignness and with heresy. Washing too much became a kind of social red flag. Ellen's practices, though practical and gentle, suddenly looked like rebellion, and in a time when heresy can earn you exile, or worse, that's not a label you want. The crowd grows again by evening. It's not a mob exactly, not yet. But it's got the rhythm of one, a beat of suspicion, fear and sanctimonious outrage. A local priest even shows up, holding a book and sniffing like he's expecting to catch the devil in the air. Excessive cleansing can cloud the soul, he says. It masks true repentance. You try to speak up. You mention disease, dirt, the children who died from sores and rot just last winter, but the crowd's not listening. Logic isn't welcome here. Only unity, only sameness. The mayor eventually steps in to calm things down. He doesn't accuse Ellen outright. He just says there will be an inquiry, a quiet one, conducted by the church. Nothing to worry about, he says with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Ellen looks tired when it's all over. Not afraid, just tired. They think dirt makes them holy, she murmurs, like pain is a virtue and cleanliness is vanity. But I've seen more death in filth than I ever have in water. You ask her if she'll stop, she shakes her head. Not until they drag me to the pyre. And that's the reality. In this place, washing too often makes you a target. Not just of gossip, but of institutional suspicion. It sets you apart. It implies non-conformity. It threatens the structure that says everyone must suffer equally to survive. There's scholarly debate about how widespread this fear of cleanliness as heresy really was. Some argue that religious institutions stoked it to root out dissent, especially among women. Others say it was more about class, how the poor resented the few who had time and tools to wash. Either way, the result was the same. Suspicion followed the soap. You walk back to your room that night with your hands dirty again. You passed up the stream. You didn't rinse your face. You didn't dare. Because even if you wanted to, you couldn't afford to look like someone who doesn't belong. You scratch your scalp. You ignore the grime. You breathe through your mouth. And you remember Ellen, brave, stubborn, maybe doomed, standing clean in a world that demands you stay stained. Because here, being dirty is how you prove you're on their side. And being clean, that's how you vanish. The wind is up today, tugging at cloaks and flinging dust into eyes, but more importantly it's spreading the scent of wet stone and something unmistakably herbal. You catch it in the air before you see its source, sweet, floral, with an undercurrent of something smoky and slightly metallic. You turn the corner, and there, standing barefoot in a shallow stream behind her cottage, is a woman with her arms raised to the sky, and her hair unbound, chanting softly. And if this doesn't scream witch, nothing does. You freeze mid-step, but she doesn't even glance your way. Her hands dip into the stream and splash water across her chest and shoulders, not in a rushed, sneaky way, but with total, almost defiant calm. There's a small dish of dried flowers and ash resting on a stone nearby. Her gown is thin, soaked, clinging to her frame, and she is, by every social standard in this town, asking for trouble. Her name is Breeder. You've heard whispers. Everyone has. Washes under the moon, they say. Talks to the water like it talks back. Keeps rosemary in her shoes. One of those women? Most people avoid her. Others pretend they don't see her when she walks through the market with clean hands and soft oiled hair. She doesn't make excuses, and that makes them even more uneasy. You wait until she finishes her ritual, not entirely sure if she'll hex you for interrupting. When she turns and sees you watching, she just grins, as if you've caught her brushing her hair, not possibly communing with unholy forces. You came to spy, she asks, teasing but unbothered? Or are you here to borrow my soap? You admit truthfully that it's a little of both. She laughs. Well, I won't curse you, unless you plan to report me. And there it is, the weight beneath the laughter. In this place, a woman bathing in solitude can be seen as something unnatural, subversive, maybe even dangerous, especially if she doesn't apologize for it. You ask if she's ever been accused directly, and she nods. Last year, she says, a priest told the mayor I was making magic with mint. I said, yes, the magic of not smelling like wet hounds. She shrugs. He didn't laugh. She invites you into her cottage. It's small but immaculate, warm and infused with the same fragrance that lingered in the air outside. You see bundles of dried herbs hanging from the beams, lavender, sage, mugwort. There's a tub made of copper and wood tucked into the corner, full, still steaming. You stare. Yes, I heat it myself, she says. You think a witch wouldn't know how to light a fire? She speaks without shame, but with a knowing edge. The bath is her rebellion, her sanctuary, and you realise her risk. Because in the world you've been walking through, this isn't just unusual, it's provocative. Women aren't supposed to take time for themselves, let alone prepare a ritual bath, let alone do it publicly. Bathing, especially for women, is considered an indulgence at best, a seduction at worst. Here's your quirky fact. Medieval courts once debated whether women who bathed alone were more likely to fall into sin. The warm water, the solitude, the steam. It was believed to encourage wandering thoughts, which is code for inappropriate thoughts, which is code for witchcraft if you're also adding herbs and whispering to the moon. Breda makes you tea, actual tea, made from boiled mint and dried lemon rind, and tells you that she bathes because she has to. You deal with blood, birth, fevers, death. You don't want to carry that into your sleep, she says. You wash it away, you set it free. And suddenly, the ritual makes sense. This isn't vanity, it's survival. But the townspeople don't see it that way. You hear it in every tavern. That Breda, she's too clean. Saw her drying her hair in the sun again. No woman needs to wash that often unless she's got something to hide. And what does she hide? Independence. That's enough. There's an open scholarly debate about how real the connection was between bathing and accusations of witchcraft. Some historians say the link was circumstantial. Clean women simply stood out more, and in times of fear, anyone who stood out got blamed. Others point to records of trials where herbal baths were specifically mentioned as evidence of consorting with the devil. Either way, being clean didn't protect you. It painted a target on your back. You ask Breda if she's afraid. She thinks for a moment. Yes, she says, but I'm more afraid of forgetting who I am. Later you walk through town and see her name on a new whisper. A group of housewives passing a pail of water mention her in lowered tones. No husband, one says, keeps herself too nice. Too much time alone, another agrees. That's when the devil speaks. It would be funny if it weren't so real, because in this world, a man can bathe in a river and call it strength, but a woman who bathes alone must be casting spells. A man who scrubs with vinegar is virtuous. A woman who smells like rosemary is suspicious. You walk back to your room with that lingering scent in your nose, the faint trace of soap, wood smoke and herbal defiance. You don't dare use your own soap tonight, not after what you've seen, not when your cloak already smells too fresh. You can feel the scrutiny tightening like a noose, so you crawl into bed dirty again, hiding your cleanliness under layers of dust and plausible deniability. Because in this place, washing your body might just be the same as revealing your power. And in a world terrified of powerful women, the bath is heresy. The abbey bells toll just before dawn, low and slow like a tired heartbeat echoing across the hills. You wake up stiff, wrapped in your travel cloak like a human scroll, and it takes a solid 30 seconds before you realise that the itch in your back isn't metaphorical, it's fleas. Again! You slap at the bite and mutter something halfway between a prayer and a curse, then crawl out from the hayloft where you've been sleeping and stretch into the misty grey of morning. Today you're headed uphill to visit the local monastery, a squat stone fortress surrounded by whispering wheat fields and the quiet weight of discipline. The monks here are known for their silence, their cider, and most interestingly, their commitment to staying dirty in the name of staying holy. You've heard stories, wild ones, something about hair shirts, self-flagellation, and spiritual resistance to soap, and honestly, you need to see it for yourself. The gates creak open slowly when you knock. A young novice greets you with a polite nod and gestures for you to follow. He doesn't speak, no surprise there, but you notice he's carrying a small pouch tied to his belt. It smells like mint and hay. You ask about it. He holds up 2 fingers, lice prevention. Charming. Inside, the monastery is silent except for the scuff of sandals and the rustle of robes. The walls are bare, the air is damp, and the scent is layered. Sweat, incense, candle wax, and the deep baked-in funk of 50 men who rarely wash. It's like someone tried to bottle virtue and forgot to open a window. You're led to Brother Anselm, the prior. He's thin, pale, and has the kind of expression that suggests he hasn't smiled since the last harvest. He offers you a stool and speaks with measured care, as if every word is being weighed for spiritual worth. You wish to learn about our customs, he says. Few ask. You nod and mention what you've heard, that the monks here avoid bathing as an act of religious devotion. It is not avoidance, he says. It is surrender. The body is temptation. To clean it excessively is to admire it. We are not here to admire flesh. And that's the core of it. To these monks, cleanliness is not godliness. It's vanity. A dangerous, slippery slope that leads to pride, indulgence and thoughts better left unthought. So instead, they go the opposite direction. They wear rough wool shirts underneath their robes, hair shirts, deliberately scratchy and uncomfortable garments meant to mortify the flesh. Some wear them every day, even while sleeping. It's not just uncomfortable, it's supposed to be. You ask how often they bathe. Brother Anselm looks genuinely amused. When we are ill, or preparing to meet God. That is, when they're dying. He explains that the monastery does maintain a small bath chamber, used mainly for those in extreme infirmity. The water is boiled with sage, blessed and rarely touched. For everyone else, the most they do is rinse their hands and feet before prayer, ritual purification, not hygiene. You're led to the scriptorium next, where a dozen monks sit copying manuscripts in silence, their fingers stained with ink and their robes dusted with crumbs from the morning's meal. The air is thick, musty, but not unbearable. One of them scratches his beard so vigorously you wonder if something is nesting in there. Another is discreetly picking at a patch of dry skin on his wrist, little flakes fluttering down like parchment snow. Despite the smell, there's peace here, purpose. These men aren't trying to impress anyone. They've left the world behind. They fast, they pray, they work in the gardens and die in the same robes they arrived in. Washing to them is distraction, and yet you notice subtle forms of care. One monk rubs a bit of honey on a cracked lip. Another dabs his eyes with chamomile tea. They may not bathe, but they do what they can to maintain the machine, just without oiling the outside. Here's a fringe fact that sticks with you. In some orders, monks who requested to bathe more than once a month were reprimanded or even punished. Not because water was scarce, but because desire for physical comfort was seen as a spiritual flaw. Hair shirts weren't just tolerated, they were expected. In fact, in some monastic traditions, your hair shirt was buried with you, a final itchy testament to your humility. There's still scholarly debate over how universally these customs applied. Some records show monastic communities that embraced cleanliness as a form of discipline, scheduled baths, strict hygiene, even herbal scrubs, but others, like this one, doubled down on asceticism. Dirt wasn't just tolerated, it was sanctified. The more you itched, the holier you were. As you're shown the small chapel, you notice a statue of St. Benedict, the founder of Western monasticism. At his feet, someone has placed a small satchel of dried lavender. A novice tells you, in a whisper, that it's to keep the mice away. But you know it's more than that. It's a nod to comfort in a place where comfort is forbidden. A soft scent in a world of roughness. You ask Brother Anselm if he misses being clean. He considers this for a long time. Cleanliness fades, he says. Discipline endures. You don't argue, but later as you sit outside the cloister garden watching the monks harvest onions and cabbage with dirt under their fingernails and sweat pooling beneath their robes, you wonder if there's more to it than that. Maybe it's about control. Denying yourself the basic relief of a bath makes every act of kindness, even to yourself, feel earned. Maybe they don't fear the water. Maybe they fear what they'll feel if they enjoy it. When you leave, the wind has shifted. You smell the fields again, the animals, the faint sweetness of distant apple trees, and beneath it all that earthy, unmistakable musk of a monastery that has deliberately said no to the bath. You scratch your arm, rub your neck, and resist the urge to reach for your soap. Because in a world where purity means pain, washing is a luxury best left to the dying. By now, your clothes are so stiff with dirt they might qualify as armour. Your skin has adopted a protective crust, equal parts sweat, smoke, and the mysterious particles that hover in medieval air like invisible insults. You've given up trying to look presentable and settled comfortably into the era's unofficial dress code. Grubby, but God-fearing. Still, there's one last place you've been putting off visiting, and it's time to face it. The hospital. You expect something terrifying. A place filled with cries and broken limbs and medieval doctors waving leeches around like magic wands. And yes, you get some of that. But what you don't expect is the smell. Not just the rot and sweat and stale blood, but something else. Something oddly floral. The air is thick with rosemary, vinegar, lavender oil, and faint traces of thyme. And beneath it all, a whiff of something both sharp and oddly comforting. Soap. You're met by Brother Laurent, a healer in robes that were probably white once but are now closer to oat-coloured mystery. He leads you through the open courtyard and into the main ward, which is lined with narrow beds, some occupied by pale, quiet patients, others by people who moan like they're auditioning for martyrdom. But the place is clean, relatively. No rats, no overflowing slop buckets, and most shocking of all, a washing basin in every corner. This is the paradox of medieval hygiene. You've walked through towns where washing is suspect, where soap is hoarded like contraband, and bathing can get you accused of heresy. But in the hospital, cleanliness is suddenly embraced, not because it's fashionable, not because it smells nice, but because here it might save lives. Brother Laurent dips a cloth in warm vinegar water and presses it to a man's chest. Wounds must be kept clean, he explains. We boil water, we steep herbs, we cleanse with care. Unclean flesh invites rot, clean flesh heals. You nod slowly, remembering every peasant who told you washing was dangerous, every monk who insisted filth was virtuous. But this man, this healer, he sees it differently. Cleanliness isn't vanity here, it's necessity. He shows you their rudimentary soap, fat and ash, boiled with lye, cut into crumbling bricks. They use it for wounds, for hands, even to scrub the floors when the weather allows. The abbess from downriver taught us, he says. Said the Saracens used oils and water to stay healthy. We tried it. Fewer fevers since. And there's the historical twist. Many of the hospital's hygiene practices weren't homegrown. They were borrowed. In fact, some of the best medieval medical knowledge came from the Islamic world, where bathing was integrated into daily religious practice, and hospitals had fully functioning hygiene systems centuries before Europe caught on. While European doctors bled their patients and feared hot water, Arab physicians were recommending soap, steam, and clean linens. Here's your fringe fact. The word alcohol comes from Arabic al-kul, originally referring to powdered eyeliner but eventually applied to distillation techniques used for medicinal cleaning. The hospital you're standing in might not understand germ theory, but it does understand that alcohol cleans wounds better than goat spit, and that washing a bandage in vinegar is preferable to reusing it caked in pus. Still, the knowledge here exists in an awkward tension with superstition. In one room, a patient lies with a poultice of marigold and onion on his chest, while a prayer scroll hangs over his bed to ward off evil humours. Another man is being treated for spirit choking, which you realise is probably pneumonia. They burn sage around him and chant psalms, but they also give him warm water, clean sheets and broth. Half magic, half medicine. Brother Laurent lets you help with the washing, just rinsing cloths, dipping them in the antiseptic-smelling water, wringing them out carefully before passing them to the nurses. You feel like you're part of something important. Civilized, even. You can't say the word out loud. It might spook the patients. But the idea lingers in your mind like the scent of rosemary. Maybe washing isn't just about pride or fear. Maybe it's about compassion. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. You overhear a visitor muttering about wasting good soap on dying men, and another woman insists that her husband's fever got worse after he was cleaned. Open the skin to demons, she says. Best to let the sweat cook it out. This is where the debate gets fierce. Some medieval thinkers, particularly those steeped in old Roman and Galenic traditions, argued for cleanliness as part of health. Others insisted disease came from within, and the best thing to do was to bleed, sweat, or purge until balance was restored. The idea that external filth might cause internal illness? Radical. Even so, the hospital persists. Patients are bathed when possible. Linens are boiled in piss. Yes, that's real. It has ammonia and works surprisingly well, and tools are left to soak in alcohol or vinegar. No sterilisation in the modern sense, but a genuine attempt at hygiene. Brother Laurent tells you they had fewer deaths last winter. The nuns think it's the herbs, he says. I think it's the water. You stay until sunset, helping where you can. A boy with a broken arm smiles when you wash the grime off his fingers. An old woman wheezes thanks as you wipe her brow. The soap isn't fancy. The water isn't always warm, but it helps. It gives people dignity in their worst hours. It tells them someone still believes they're worth the effort. And for the first time in days, you feel like bathing isn't rebellion. It's mercy. You leave the hospital with vinegar on your hands and lavender in your nose. The town still smells like the usual disaster stew, burnt meat, feet, and pig panic. But now it's a little more bearable. You've seen a glimpse of something rare in this world. The idea that being clean might not be dangerous. It might be kind. As you settle down to sleep, you take a damp cloth, quietly rinse your face, and lie back with a sigh. Because today, at least, you didn't wash to defy the world. You wash to care for it. You wake up early, well before the sun decides to drag its head above the clouds. The world outside is fog-drenched and ghostly, and everything feels damp. Your clothes, your hair, your very soul. But today you're going somewhere different. Somewhere the water actually flows. Word around town is that there's a bathhouse still operating on the edge of the city, a relic of better-smelling days when communal bathing was considered not just acceptable but fashionable. The locals call it the steam hall, and most pretend it doesn't exist, so of course you're going. You follow a crumbling Roman road past overgrown ruins and half-sunken statues, the kind that whisper about lost hygiene like it's a religion. The bathhouse comes into view just past a grove of stunted trees. Long and low, its stonework patched with newer wood, smoke curling from a rooftop chimney like a secret too warm to keep hidden. It's both beautiful and slightly sad, like a celebrity who refuses to retire. Inside, the air hits you like a wall, hot, humid, thick with steam and eucalyptus. Yes, eucalyptus. You didn't even know they had eucalyptus, but here it is, boiled and wafting through the hall like a blessing. The room is dim, lit by flickering tallow candles and slanted sunlight from narrow windows. Voices echo low and soft. Laughter, splashing. No judgment, no fear. You stand at the threshold, slightly stunned. After everything you've seen, mud, suspicion, ritual bathing in secret streams, this feels like another planet. There are people, actual people, sitting in warm water. Naked, yes, but also at peace. Scrubbing each other's backs, soaking in silence, breathing. You catch a whiff of rosemary oil, a splash of lemon balm. Someone is humming. The bath